Welcome back to Sera's Werewolf Romance collection, where the alphas are fiercely possessive and the heroines never back down. Quick question for the pack before we dive into today's chaos. What is your #1 favorite romance trope? Forced proximity, fated mates, or a secret softy alpha? Let me know in the comments and drop a cat emoji if you have a sassy pet who constantly judges your life choices. Today, we have an incredibly fun and tense story. It involves a ruined luxury blanket, an alpha faking a feral regression to dodge a marriage contract, and a fiercely independent beta who refuses to be intimidated. But before we start, if you want to support the channel, get early access to complete stories, and unlock exclusive pack badges, hit that join button down below. It helps us keep the lights on and the audiobooks coming. Now get comfortable. The laundry is ruined, and the alpha is blocking the door. Let's read Chapter 1. Nadine pushed through the heavy wooden doors of the pack house, her boots tracking a thin layer of dirt across the polished floorboards. She adjusted the thick strap of her heavy canvas gear bag on her right shoulder, feeling the familiar dull ache of a long patrol. Her silver tactical stopwatch, securely clipped to her belt, dug slightly into her side. It had been a grueling 12-hour shift along the eastern ridge, and all she wanted was a hot shower and her bed. She paused in the entryway, unclipping her black two-way radio to switch the channel to the main security feed. I just want one quiet evening without someone breaking a patrol rule, Nadine thought, exhaling a tired breath. Just one night of peace. Before heading to her quarters, she stopped by the war room to drop off her handwritten patrol logs. The room was empty, the large oak table scattered with maps. As she turned to leave, her sharp hazel eyes caught sight of a suspiciously soft, slate-gray blanket bunched up on the leather sofa. It was totally out of place among the harsh, tactical gear and rigid furniture. She walked over, reaching out to grab the thick fabric. It felt incredibly expensive, easily a $500 luxury item, but someone had carelessly left it behind. Nadine scooped the blanket under her free arm. People leave their trash everywhere, she muttered to the empty room. She carried her canvas bag, her radio, and the gray blanket down the narrow staircase leading to the subterranean laundry room. The basement air was cool and smelled of harsh detergent. As she stepped into the brightly lit room, a low meow echoed from the corner. Ripley, her tortoiseshell cat, sat on top of a vibrating washing machine. The cat's bright yellow eyes tracked Nadine's every move. Ripley aggressively scratched at the small red breakaway collar around her neck, clearly annoyed by its presence. "Stop fighting it, you little menace," Nadine said, dropping her heavy canvas bag onto the folding table with a loud thud. She walked over to the row of industrial washers, pulled open the round glass door of the nearest machine, and shoved the soft gray blanket inside. She reached up to the shelf, grabbed a plastic cup of liquid fabric softener, and poured it directly over the fabric. "This cat acts like she owns the building," Nadine observed internally, watching Ripley jump from the washer to the folding table, deliberately knocking over an empty plastic hanger just to hear it clatter on the floor. Nadine shut the washer door and pressed the start button. The machine locked with a loud click and began to fill with water, the mechanical hum echoing off the tiled walls. She leaned against the cold metal of the machine, closing her eyes for just a second to enjoy the soothing rhythm. A heavy, frantic set of footsteps thundered down the basement stairs. Nadine's eyes snapped open. She immediately reached for the black two-way radio still clutched in her left hand, her instincts flaring. She squared her shoulders, ready for a security breach. Jason stood in the doorway. The alpha's broad shoulders completely filled the frame. His ruffled dark hair was sticking up at odd angles, as if he had been pulling at it for hours. His chest was heaving, drawing in ragged, shallow breaths. His piercing gold eyes were wide, darting frantically around the room before locking directly onto the spinning washing machine behind her. He looks completely unhinged, Nadine thought, keeping her posture perfectly straight. Did the perimeter fall? Jason took a slow, heavy step into the laundry room. The air around him crackled with a dangerous, wild tension. He was supposed to be resting. The entire pack knew their alpha was struggling, fighting a feral regression that made his moods unpredictable. But right now, he did not look unpredictable. He looked entirely focused on the suds building up behind the glass door. "What are you doing?" Jason demanded, his voice a low, rough growl that vibrated in the small room. He stepped closer, effectively blocking the only exit. Nadine crossed her arms, ignoring the intimidating display. She was a beta, and she had fought too hard for 10 years to be easily spooked. "I am doing the laundry, Alpha." Someone left a blanket in the war room. Jason's gold eyes flashed with pure panic. "You washed it. You washed the blanket." "Yes," Nadine replied, her voice steady and polite. "It was dirty." Jason stared at her, his jaw tight, looking like a terrifying predator trapped in a very small cage. "Now I need your scent back," he growled. Chapter 2. Jason stood frozen, staring at the swirling, soapy water behind the glass. The crisp blend of crushed mint and rain-soaked cedar, Nadine's exact scent, was rapidly being destroyed by cheap lavender fabric softener. He had been secretly hoarding that specific blanket for weeks. Whenever the crushing pressure of pack leadership threatened to tip him into a feral state, burying his face in that soft fabric kept his mind grounded. Now it was ruined. He looked away from the washing machine and locked his gold eyes onto Nadine. She stood perfectly still, her russet hair tied in a practical tight knot. A light dusting of freckles covered her nose, and she did not look the least bit afraid of him. "Say something intimidating," Jason commanded himself, his heart hammering against his ribs. "You are the Alpha. Stop staring at her freckles. Say something smart." His mind went completely blank. The fierce, terrifying feral act he had been projecting vanished into thin air the moment she stared directly back at him. Stage fright seized him instantly. He opened his mouth to demand she fix the situation, but the words refused to form. He simply stood there, breathing heavily, looking wildly out of place in the sterile laundry room. "He is completely stalling," Nadine observed internally, studying his frozen posture. "The Alpha of the territory is losing an argument to a washing machine." Nadine sighed. She uncrossed her arms and tapped her fingernails against the top of the metal washing machine in a steady, calculating rhythm. She was exhausted, and she did not have the patience to deal with an Alpha having a stare-down with a household appliance. "Alpha," Nadine said, her tone sharp and completely unimpressed. "You are blocking the fire exit." Jason blinked, entirely thrown off by her practical scolding. "The blanket," he finally managed to say, pointing a slightly shaking finger at the washer. "You ruined it." "It is fabric, Jason. It will dry," she replied, refusing to back down from his intense posture. "And frankly, hovering in a doorway and growling at me over laundry is highly inappropriate behavior. If you need clean bedding, the quartermaster has plenty. Now please move. I need to get my canvas bag." She is completely fearless, Jason thought, a sudden wave of deep admiration cutting through his panic. "I am acting like a wild animal, and she is treating me like a misbehaving scout." Before Jason could attempt to salvage his pride, a blur of tortoiseshell fur launched off the folding table. Ripley landed squarely on Nadine's shoulder. The cat let out a loud, demanding yowl, swatting a paw at Nadine's ear, highly displeased by the loud argument disrupting her territory. Nadine winced, grabbing the cat before those sharp claws could dig into her uniform. Ripley twisted, kicking her back legs. "I do not have time for this," Nadine muttered. She marched directly up to Jason. He stiffened, bracing himself, but instead of pushing past him, she abruptly shoved the squirming cat directly into his broad chest. Startled, Jason's arms instinctively came up to catch the animal. "Hold her," Nadine ordered. "She is in a mood, and I need both hands to retrieve my bag." Jason stood completely rigid. He was a lethal predator, responsible for the safety of hundreds, currently holding an angry, vibrating ball of fur. Ripley flattened her ears, her bright yellow eyes glaring up at him with deep resentment. The cat let out a low growl that rivaled his own. "If this cat scratches my nose, I will never recover my dignity," Jason thought, keeping his hands perfectly still so he wouldn't upset the animal further. Nadine turned her back on him, calmly walking over to the folding table to grab the strap of her heavy canvas gear bag. She slung it over her right shoulder and picked up her black two-way radio from the table. She looked back at Jason, who was awkwardly cradling Ripley like a live explosive. "I need to check the dryer lint traps," Nadine stated smoothly, walking past him toward the back of the room. "Don't drop my cat, Alpha. She holds grudges." Jason watched her walk away, his chest tight with the mix of frustration and profound affection. He needed her scent to stay sane, but standing here, holding her troublesome pet, he realized he needed her sharp wit even more. Chapter 3. The council room was suffocatingly warm. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, illuminating the heavy dust particles hovering in the air. Jason paced the length of the long wooden table, running a frustrated hand through his ruffled dark hair. Sitting around the table were the 4 eldest members of the pack, their faces set in grim, unyielding expressions. Resting in the center of the table was a thick stack of pristine white papers. It was a deeply luxurious arrangement, a binding treaty outlining a $500,000 merger with a neighboring pack. The catch was simple. Jason had to mate with their alpha's daughter by the end of the month. "You are losing control, Jason," Elder Corbin stated, tapping a wrinkled finger on the top page of the contract. "The patrols report you hovering around the barracks. You cornered our beta in the laundry room yesterday over a piece of fabric. Your mind is slipping into a feral state. You need a high-ranking mate to ground you, and this treaty provides exactly that." Jason stopped pacing. He turned to face the elders, letting his jaw tighten and his shoulders hunch slightly. He pushed his breathing to become shallow and rough, intentionally letting a dangerous, ragged growl slip from his throat. "Let them think I'm losing my mind," Jason thought, letting his gold eyes flash brightly. "If they think I'm too unstable to reason with, they cannot force my hand on this ridiculous paperwork." "I do not need a bought mate," Jason snapped, his voice rough and aggressive. He stepped closer to the table, and 2 of the elders immediately leaned back in their chairs, intimidated by his display. "I need my pack secured. The southern border has been quiet, too quiet. I cannot focus on a treaty when my territory is at risk." "The border is fine," another elder argued gently, trying to soothe him. "Beta Nadine has the patrols running perfectly. Her mandatory radio check-ins have secured the entire perimeter. You need to focus on your health. Sign the papers." Jason glared at the document. He could not sign it. His real obsession, the only thing that actually kept his mind clear and his heart steady, was currently organizing tactical maps down the hall. Without the gray blanket he had stolen from her, the crushing weight of his duties felt sharper, harder to manage. He needed to be near Nadine. He needed her calming presence to settle the loud, demanding instincts of his inner wolf. An idea struck him, brilliant and slightly reckless. If Beta Nadine has the patrols running perfectly, then she is the one I need to observe. Jason declared loudly, slamming his hand down on the wooden table. The loud crack made the elders jump. "My instincts are tied to the safety of the territory. I will shadow her operations, directly." Elder Corbin frowned, looking confused. "You want to run border patrols? Alpha, you are the leader." "You do not need to ride in the mud with the trackers." "My word is final," Jason growled, leaning heavily over the table, keeping up the unstable, feral facade. "I am formally assigning myself to shadow Beta Nadine. I will ride in her vehicle. I will monitor her protocols. Until I am satisfied that the border is impenetrable, this contract stays untouched." Before the elders could voice another protest, Jason turned on his heel and strode out of the heavy double doors. The moment he was in the empty hallway, he dropped the aggressive posture. He let out a long, quiet sigh of relief, running a hand through his dark hair once more. He had successfully dodged the $500,000 problem, for now. More importantly, he had just given himself a valid, unquestionable excuse to spend hours locked in a small truck with the woman he had secretly pined over for years. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, sending a brief message to Tomas, the head enforcer. "Inform Beta Nadine that I will be accompanying her on her afternoon patrol. Tell her to wait for me by her truck." Jason slipped the phone back into his pocket, a small, genuine smile breaking across his sharp jawline. He knew she was going to be furious, and he could hardly wait. Chapter 4. Nadine stood in the gravel driveway of the compound, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The midday sun beat down on the hood of her vehicle, a meticulously kept crimson-red Chevrolet Colorado. It was a $40,000 personal investment, an expensive machine she had saved up for and rebuilt with her own hands. The paint gleamed flawlessly, and the heavy off-road tires were freshly scrubbed. She tapped her fingernails against the silver tactical stopwatch clipped to her belt. Tomas had delivered the message 20 minutes ago, and she was still trying to process the sheer audacity of it. The Alpha, who was supposedly battling a severe feral regression, had decided to randomly insert himself into her highly structured routine. He is going to ruin my schedule, Nadine thought, glaring at the gravel. I do not have time to babysit a moody alpha in the woods. The heavy crunch of footsteps drew her attention. Jason was walking toward her, dressed in dark tactical gear that highlighted his broad shoulders. He looked entirely too calm for a man who had nearly growled the laundry room down the day before.
Beta,
Jason greeted casually, stopping a few feet away. His gold eyes swept over her pristine truck. Nice ride. Are we ready? Nadine did not smile. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the keys, and unlocked the doors with a sharp chirp. If you are riding in my vehicle, Alpha, there are strict rules. Jason raised an eyebrow, highly amused. He loved when she pushed back. I am listening. First, Nadine began, pointing a stern finger at him. Do not adjust the climate control. I have it set perfectly. Second, my black two-way radio is for official communications only. Do not touch it. Third, strictly no boots on the dashboard. I cleaned the interior this morning, and I will not hesitate to leave you walking if you scuff the trim. Jason pressed his lips together, fighting a very wide smile. He slowly raised both hands in a gesture of surrender. Understood. Your truck, your kingdom. I am just the humble passenger. Nadine narrowed her sharp hazel eyes at him, trying to figure out his game. He did not sound feral. He sounded distinctly playful, utilizing a dry humor she rarely saw from him in public. Choosing not to engage further, she pulled open the driver's side door and climbed in. Jason walked around the front of the crimson-red Chevrolet and settled into the passenger seat. He immediately reached up and adjusted the air conditioning vent, aiming the cool air directly at his face. Nadine paused, her hands resting on the steering wheel. She turned her head slowly, leveling a deeply unimpressed look at him. I run warm, Jason offered smoothly, not looking the least bit sorry. He is doing this on purpose, Nadine realized, shaking her head. She started the engine, the powerful motor rumbling to life. She shifted the truck into gear and guided it out of the compound, heading toward the dense tree line of the southern border. For the first 20 minutes, the ride was silent. Nadine focused strictly on the rugged dirt road, her hands steady on the wheel. Jason sat quietly beside her, looking out the window, occasionally stealing glances at her profile. Being this close to her, surrounded by her calm and steady presence, his mind felt clearer than it had in months. The crushing anxiety of his alpha duties melted away. So, Jason finally spoke, breaking the silence. Are you going to let me look at the patrol map, or do I have to guess where we are going? Before Nadine could deliver a witty reply, the black two-way radio mounted on the center console crackled loudly with static. Beta Actual, this is Katrina. Her tracker's loud, slightly raspy voice filled the cabin. Nadine immediately grabbed the microphone, her demeanor shifting to pure business. Go ahead, Katrina. I am currently 2 miles east of the river bend, Katrina reported, the sound of crunching leaves audible in the background. I have located a set of strange tracks in the mud. They are large, not matching our standard perimeter wildlife. Nadine gripped the steering wheel tighter. Copy that. Hold your position. We are 10 minutes out. She slammed the radio back into its cradle and hit the gas, the heavy tires throwing dirt behind them. Jason braced a hand against the door panel, his playful attitude vanishing entirely. His gold eyes sharpened, focusing on the road ahead. The feral act was gone, replaced by the lethal, calculating focus of a true pack leader. Chapter 5. The crimson-red Chevrolet Colorado skidded to a halt near the edge of the riverbank, the heavy tires crunching loudly over dry branches. Nadine shifted the truck into park and immediately unbuckled her seatbelt. She grabbed her heavy canvas gear bag from the back seat and stepped out into the humid afternoon air. Jason exited the passenger side simultaneously, his movements fluid and completely silent. He scanned the dense tree line, his gold eyes sharp and searching. There was no trace of the unhinged, feral alpha the elders worried about. He was fully present and alert. Katrine stepped out from behind a thick oak tree, waving a hand to get their attention. The loud, fiercely loyal tracker pointed down at the muddy bank near the water's edge. Nadine walked over, crouching down to inspect the indentations in the damp soil. She tapped her fingernails against the silver tactical stopwatch on her belt, calculating the stride length. She let out a slow, tired breath. "These are elk tracks, Katrine," Nadine stated politely but firmly, pointing to the distinct cloven shape hidden beneath the distorted mud. "A large male. It slipped on the wet bank, which makes the print look wider and elongated. It is not a rogue wolf." Katrine leaned over, squinting at the mud. "Well, look at that. My mistake, Beta. The mud threw me off. Better safe than sorry, right?" "Always," Nadine agreed, standing up and brushing a speck of dirt from her trousers. "Resume your standard patrol route. Report in at the next 15-minute interval." Katrina nodded briskly and jogged back into the woods, quickly disappearing into the foliage. Nadine turned back toward the truck, expecting Jason to be frustrated by the false alarm. Instead, he was leaning casually against the slate-gray side mirror of the Chevrolet, watching her with a quiet, intense focus. "Good call," Jason noted quietly as she approached. Most people would have panicked and called the enforcers just to be sure. You read the ground instantly. Nadine slung her canvas bag into the back seat and climbed into the driver's side. Jason mirrored her, settling back into the passenger seat. She didn't start the engine right away. The adrenaline of a potential threat had faded, leaving a quiet, heavy stillness in the cabin of the truck. "He is staring at me again," Nadine thought, keeping her eyes fixed firmly on the steering wheel. "Why is he acting so calm?" "You have excellent instincts, Nadine," Jason said, his voice dropping slightly, stripping away his usual dry humor. He shifted in his seat, turning his broad shoulders to face her completely. Nadine stiffened slightly at the sound of her first name. As the beta, she was used to titles. "I have had a lot of practice, Alpha, that is all." 10 years. Jason corrected softly. He did not look away. "You showed up at our borders as a 19-year-old kid with nothing to your name. Gerald betrayed you, left you entirely alone during a brutal power grab, and you walked away. You didn't break. You spent 10 grueling years clawing your way through the ranks, demanding respect, and earning this beta position with sheer grit." Nadine froze. She gripped the leather steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. No one spoke about Gerald. The traitorous former friend who had abandoned her for a higher-ranking mate was a closed chapter she refused to discuss. Yet hearing Jason lay out her painful history, not with pity, but with deep, resonant respect, caught her completely off guard. "I wanted you to know," Jason continued, his tone incredibly sincere, "that I see the work you put in. I commend you for it. You are the most respected beta this pack has ever seen, and you did it entirely on your own." The validation hit Nadine like a punch to the gut. For an entire decade, she had built tough, independent walls to ensure she would never need to rely on a man again. She demanded accountability from everyone because she had been shown none in her past. But sitting here, hearing the alpha of the strongest pack acknowledge her hidden struggles without a shred of condescension, caused a crack in her heavy armor. She turned her head slowly, meeting his gaze. Her sharp hazel eyes searched his face for any sign of mockery, but she found nothing except genuine awe. They stared at each other in the quiet cabin. The silence stretched, thick and entirely palpable. Suddenly, Jason lost his train of thought. He had planned to say more, to tell her that her strength grounded him, but looking directly into her eyes gave him crippling stage fright. His cheeks flushed slightly, and he awkwardly cleared his throat, completely forgetting how to speak. Nadine noticed the sudden shift. A small, genuine smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. The fierce alpha was blushing. Chapter 6. The packhouse kitchen was brightly lit with early morning sun. Nadine pushed through the swinging doors, carrying her heavy canvas gear bag in one hand. She wore a dark blue woven wool scarf wrapped loosely around her neck to combat the morning chill. Her silver tactical stopwatch rested securely against her hip. She walked straight to the large wooden dining table, dropping the bag onto the floor with a heavy thud. The room was quiet, smelling of freshly brewed coffee. Nadine unwound the dark blue scarf, letting it drape carelessly over the back of a wooden dining chair. She walked to the counter, grabbed a ceramic mug, and poured herself a hot drink. I have 3 border rotations to schedule today, Nadine calculated silently, tapping her fingernails against the granite countertop. If Bryce is still limping, I will need to swap him out with Rose. The kitchen door swung open again. Jason walked in. He wore a simple black t-shirt and dark jeans. His piercing gold eyes immediately scanned the room, locking onto Nadine first and then landing directly on the dark blue scarf resting on the chair. He stopped walking, his broad shoulders squared as he stared at the fabric. He stepped closer to the table, completely ignoring the coffee pot. He slid his cell phone into his pocket, his gaze fixed on a discarded clothing. She left it right there, Jason thought, keeping his breathing steady so he wouldn't look too eager. One quick swipe, and I can hide it in my office before she even turns around. Good morning, Alpha, Nadine said, not looking away from the refrigerator as she searched for milk. The patrol logs are already on your desk. We had a quiet night. Good work, Beta, Jason replied smoothly. He took another silent step toward the wooden chair. His hands slowly reached out toward the dark blue wool. He was inches away from claiming his prize. A sharp, demanding yowl echoed from above. Jason froze. He looked up just in time to see Ripley, the tortoiseshell cat, launch herself from the top of the tall wooden cabinets. The cat sailed through the air and landed squarely on the seat of the chair, directly on top of the dark blue scarf. Ripley's bright yellow eyes glared up at Jason with intense, unapologetic hostility. She aggressively scratched at her small, red breakaway collar, making the tiny bell jingle loudly. Then she opened her mouth and dropped a very dead, very limp field mouse directly onto the toe of Jason's expensive leather boot. Jason stared down at the dead rodent resting on his footwear. He did not move a single muscle. He slowly blinked his gold eyes, processing the sheer disrespect of the animal. I am the leader of a heavily armed pack, Jason noted internally, a dry annoyance creeping into his mind. And I am currently being threatened by a 10-pound house pet over a piece of knitwear. Nadine turned around, holding a small carton of milk. She took one look at the standoff between her alpha and her cat and let out a quiet sigh. Ripley, we talked about this. Nadine scolded gently. She walked over, stepping carefully around Jason, and picked up the dead mouse by its tail. She tossed it directly into the trash can. Stop bringing your hunting trophies into the food prep areas. She did not bring it to the kitchen, Jason stated, pointing a rigid finger at the cat. She brought it specifically to me. It was a warning. Nadine picked up her ceramic mug and took a sip of her coffee. Her sharp hazel eyes shifted from the cat to the alpha, and then to the dark blue scarf currently pinned beneath Ripley's paws. She raised an eyebrow, easily putting the pieces together. Were you trying to take my scarf? Nadine asked, her tone entirely polite but laced with sharp wit. Jason cleared his throat, suddenly finding the kitchen floor extremely interesting. He shifted his weight, ensuring the dead mouse stain on his boot was hidden from view. I was simply moving it, Jason lied smoothly, looking back up at her. It is a tripping hazard. We must uphold strict safety protocols in the communal areas. It is draped over a chair, Jason, Nadine replied, not buying his excuse for a single second. Unless you plan on climbing the furniture, I think the safety protocols are perfectly intact. Ripley hissed quietly, just to punctuate Nadine's point. Right, of course, Jason said, taking a step back. He desperately wanted that scarf, but he refused to fight a cat for it in front of the woman he was trying to impress. He offered her a brief, tight nod. Carry on with your breakfast, Beta. I have paperwork to review. He turned quickly and walked out of the kitchen. Nadine watched the heavy doors swing shut behind him. She looked down at Ripley, who was now peacefully washing her front paw while sitting on the dark blue wool. He lies like a guilty child, Nadine thought, a small genuine smile touching her lips. And why is he so obsessed with my laundry? Chapter 7. A. Jason sat behind his large oak desk in the Alpha's office, the midday sunlight catching the dust motes in the air. He held his cell phone in his left hand, scrolling through an endless list of boring perimeter reports. The pack was stable, but the constant paperwork was tedious. A knock sounded at the heavy wooden door. Mammon, one of the reliable pack warriors, stepped into the room. He carried a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with dark red wax.
A courier just dropped this at the main gate, Alpha,
Mammon reported, walking forward and placing the letter directly onto the center of the desk.
It is a formal request for a border summit.
Jason set his phone down. He picked up the envelope, feeling the expensive, heavy paper. He cracked the red wax seal with his thumb and pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. His piercing gold eyes quickly scanned the elegant handwriting. As he read the name signed at the bottom, his jaw tightened instantly. His playful, lively demeanor vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. The letter was from Gerald. This coward has the nerve to demand a meeting on my land? Jason thought, a dangerous anger simmering in his chest. I should decline it and send the courier back with a threat. Before Jason could formulate a plan, the office door opened again. Nadine walked in, holding a stack of handwritten patrol logs. Her russet hair was pulled back into its usual tight knot, and the silver tactical stopwatch gleamed on her belt. She looked entirely professional and highly capable. The morning reports, Alpha, Nadine said, stepping up to the desk. She placed the papers down, her sharp hazel eyes immediately catching the torn red wax and the expensive cream-colored envelope. Did we receive a treaty update? Jason looked up at her. He knew exactly what this letter meant to her. 10 years ago, Gerald had thrown Nadine aside the moment a power vacuum opened, marrying a higher-ranking female just to secure his own alpha title. Nadine had fled that night with nothing but the clothes on her back. Jason picked up the letter and held it out to her. He did not say a word. Nadine reached out and took the thick paper. Her eyes dropped to the text. It only took her 3 seconds to reach the bottom signature. Jason watched her carefully. Her tall, athletic frame went completely rigid. All the color drained from her face, leaving her freckles standing out sharply against her pale skin. Her breathing stopped entirely for a long, agonizing moment. 10 years of building my life, and his name still turns my stomach into ice, Nadine thought, her hands beginning to tremble slightly. I will not let him ruin my peace. Her fingers clamped down on the edges of the heavy paper. She gripped it so tightly that the expensive cream material buckled. With a sharp, sudden movement, she accidentally tore the paper right down the center. The loud ripping sound echoed in the quiet office. Nadine jumped, dropping the 2 torn halves onto the desk as if they had burned her. I apologize, Alpha. I will take that back together. Jason stood up slowly. He walked around the large desk, closing the distance between them. He did not care about the torn paper. He only cared about the haunted look in her hazel eyes. You do not have to fix it, Nadine, Jason said quietly, keeping his voice incredibly soft. And you do not have to attend this summit. I can take Tomas and the enforcers. I will handle him. Nadine straightened her spine, forcing the vulnerability away. She tapped her fingernails against the side of her leg, falling back into her pragmatic, fierce persona. I am the beta of this pack, Nadine stated firmly, looking him directly in the eye. If a neighboring leader requests a border meeting, I am required to be there to manage the security details. I will not hide in the compound while you do my job. Jason saw the fierce pride radiating from her. He knew pushing her to stay behind would only insult her deeply earned rank. She is terrified, but she refuses to bend, Jason realized, a wave of profound respect washing over him. I will stand between her and this ghost, no matter what it takes. Very well, Jason agreed, offering her a respectful nod. The meeting is at noon tomorrow. Prep the warriors. We go together. Chapter 8. The supply room was dimly lit, the walls lined with heavy metal shelving units holding various tactical equipment. Nadine stood near the center wooden table, her heavy canvas gear bag resting open in front of her. Her movements were sharp and mechanical. She reached onto the nearest metal shelf and picked up a heavy black flashlight, shoving it into the side pocket of her bag. Next, she grabbed 2 spare radio batteries and a sealed, waterproof first aid kit, packing them neatly into the main compartment. Andrew and Carl stood at attention near the doorway. Both reliable pack warriors wore standard dark tactical gear, waiting patiently for her instructions. "We parked the Chevrolet 50 yards from the tree line," Nadine instructed, her voice crisp and entirely professional. She did not look up from her bag, preferring to keep her eyes on the tasks. "Andrew, you take the eastern flank. Carl, you hold the western approach. You do not speak unless spoken to by the visiting Alpha. Understood?" "Yes, Beta." Andrew and Carl replied in perfect unison. Nadine picked up a coiled rope from the table, her knuckles white from gripping it too tightly. Her heart was beating rapidly against her ribs. She was only an hour away from seeing Gerald. The boy she had trusted with her life had grown into a man who sold her out for a title. The anxiety was a cold, sharp ache in her chest. "I just need to keep my face blank," Nadine coached herself silently, tossing the rope into the canvas bag. "I will treat him like a stranger. He holds no power over me anymore." The heavy supply room door swung open. Jason stepped inside. He was dressed in a sharp, dark suit, a stark contrast to his usual casual gear. The tailored clothing made his broad shoulders look even more intimidating. He looked every inch a powerful, wealthy leader. "Andrew, Carl," Jason said smoothly, stopping next to the table. "Go start the vehicles. Wait for us outside." The 2 warriors nodded and quickly exited the room, leaving Jason and Nadine alone. Nadine zipped up the heavy canvas bag with a loud, aggressive pull. She slung the thick strap over her right shoulder, refusing to let her anxiety show. "The perimeter is set, Alpha. We are ready to move out." Jason did not move toward the door. Instead, he stepped directly in front of her, blocking her path. He looked down at her, his piercing gold eyes stripped of all humor and entirely focused. He dropped his shoulders, letting all pretense of his wild, feral act vanish completely. "Look at me, Nadine," Jason requested quietly. Nadine hesitated, but she slowly lifted her chin, meeting his intense gaze. "You have spent a decade proving your worth to this pack," Jason told her, his voice steady and completely clear. There was no growl. No unstable alpha energy, just a man speaking directly to his equal. "You rebuilt your life from scratch. Gerald is a coward who bought his title with a marriage contract. He is not your superior. He is not even your equal." Nadine swallowed hard, her throat feeling incredibly dry. The direct validation, delivered without any pity, settled deep into her chest. "He sees exactly how scared I am, and he isn't using it against me," Nadine realized, her grip on the canvas bag loosening slightly. "He actually respects me." "I will not let him disrespect me," Nadine said, her voice dropping to a quiet, fierce whisper. Jason reached out, his large hand gently catching her elbow to ensure she was listening. "You will not have to say a word to him if you do not want to," Jason promised, his tone ringing with quiet authority. "You are my beta. I will handle him. If he steps out of line, I will shut him down before he finishes his sentence. You do not have to fight this one alone." The sheer relief of his words felt like a boulder off her shoulders. For 10 years, she had carried every burden completely by herself. Now, a powerful alpha was willingly standing beside her, offering true partnership. Nadine gave a small, jerky nod. "Okay, let's go." Chapter 9. The midday sun struggled to pierce the dense canopy of trees near the eastern border. Nadine parked the crimson-red Chevrolet Colorado exactly 50 yards from the designated meeting spot. She turned off the engine and unclipped her black two-way radio from her belt, checking the frequency before stepping out of the truck. Andrew and Carl instantly broke off, taking their positions on the eastern and western flanks, just as she had instructed. Jason stepped out of the passenger side. His dark-tailored suit looked entirely out of place in the rugged woods, but he wore it like armor. He adjusted his cuffs, his gold eyes scanning the quiet tree line. A sleek black luxury sedan rolled slowly down the dirt path, its tires crunching loudly over the dry leaves. The expensive vehicle stopped 20 yards away. The driver's side door opened, and Gerald stepped out. He wore a $2,000 tailored suit, his hair perfectly styled. He looked exactly the same as Nadine remembered, just slightly older and infinitely more arrogant. His smug smile appeared the moment he saw her standing next to the crimson-red truck. Nadine stood perfectly straight, her hands resting naturally at her sides. She forced her expression to remain entirely neutral. Gerald walked forward, stopping 10 feet away from them. He completely ignored Jason. He locked his eyes onto Nadine, his smug smile widening. "Nadine," Gerald greeted, his voice dripping with condescension. 10 years, and you were still playing in the dirt. I heard you finally managed to secure a beta position. Good for you. It is nice to see you found a place that accepts charity cases. Nadine's jaw tightened. She opened her mouth to deliver a polite, cutting response, but Jason moved before she could speak. Jason took one large, deliberate step forward, placing himself slightly in front of Nadine. He did not yell. He did not growl. He simply stared directly at Gerald, projecting an aura of pure, lethal alpha energy that filled the clearing instantly. The sudden pressure in the air was suffocating. "You will address me first, Gerald," Jason stated, his voice a low, cold rumble that carried clearly across the dirt path. "You are standing on my territory, and you will address my beta with the strict respect her rank demands, or you will get back in your car and leave." Gerald's smug smile vanished instantly. He took a small, involuntary step backward, clearly rattled by Jason's overwhelming presence. The cowardly alpha tried to recover his posture, straightening his expensive jacket. He is terrified of Jason, Nadine noticed, a sudden wave of quiet triumph washing over her. Gerald only bullies people he thinks are weaker than him. "I meant no disrespect, Alpha Jason." Gerald backpedaled quickly, his tone losing all of its arrogance. "I am simply here to discuss the hunting boundaries near the river. We have noticed some overlap." "The boundaries were set 50 years ago," Jason replied coldly, not yielding an inch of ground. "If your trackers are crossing the river, they are trespassing. Fix your navigation, Gerald. That concludes our business." Gerald blinked, thoroughly dismissed before the meeting had even begun. He looked at Jason's cold, unyielding expression and then glanced at Nadine. She stood tall behind her alpha, looking entirely unimpressed. "Understood," Gerald muttered quickly. He turned around, practically jogging back to his black luxury sedan. He climbed inside, started the engine, and reversed rapidly down the dirt path, disappearing into the trees. Jason waited until the sound of the engine faded completely. He relaxed his broad shoulders, the heavy, lethal pressure vanishing from the clearing as quickly as it had arrived. He turned to face Nadine. "Are you all right?" Jason asked quietly. Nadine looked at the empty dirt road, a profound sense of closure settling over her. The ghost that had haunted her for 10 years was just a pathetic coward in an expensive suit. "Yes," Nadine answered, a genuine easy smile breaking across her face. "I am perfectly fine." Chapter 10. The inside of the crimson-red Chevrolet Colorado was quiet as they drove back toward the compound. Nadine kept her hands steady on the leather steering wheel, navigating the bumpy dirt road with practiced ease. The intense adrenaline that had spiked during the summit was slowly wearing off, leaving a quiet, comfortable exhaustion in its place. Jason sat in the passenger seat, his dark suit jacket unbuttoned. He rested his elbow on the windowsill, watching the trees pass by. He had not gloated about shutting Gerald down, nor had he demanded any thanks. He simply sat beside her, radiating a calm, supportive presence. Nadine tapped her fingernails lightly against the steering wheel. She thought about how easily Jason had stepped in front of her. He had not taken away her power. He had merely acted as a shield, so she did not have to waste her energy on a man who did not deserve it. For her entire adult life, she believed relying on someone else was a fatal weakness. Today, Jason proved her entirely wrong. "He treated me like an equal partner," Nadine realized, a warm, unfamiliar feeling blooming directly in her chest. "He saw my past, and he didn't judge me for it." She glanced over at him. Jason was looking forward, his sharp jawline relaxed. He looked entirely peaceful. "Thank you," Nadine said softly, breaking the long silence. Jason turned his head, his gold eyes meeting hers. He offered a small, gentle smile. You do not need to thank me, Nadine. You earned your place here. He needed to be reminded of that fact. Nadine looked back at the road, her heart beating a little faster. She took a deep breath, letting go of the heavy, independent walls she had carried for a decade. She pulled her right hand off the steering wheel and rested it lightly on the center console, leaving her palm facing upward. It was a small, incredibly vulnerable gesture. Jason looked down at her hand resting near the gear shift. His breath hitched slightly. The alpha, who had just terrified a rival leader without raising his voice, suddenly felt entirely nervous. Do not mess this up, Jason told himself firmly. Just be normal. He slowly reached his left hand across the console. He rested his palm against hers, his long fingers gently sliding against her skin. The physical contact sent a sudden electric jolt straight up his arm. Nadine did not pull away. Instead, she curled her fingers upward, gently locking them with his. Jason swallowed hard, his heart hammering wildly. He gripped her hand softly, marveling at the rough calluses on her palms that spoke of her 10 years of hard work. He kept his eyes fixed strictly on the windshield, terrified that if he looked at her, he would lose his train of thought completely. They drove the rest of the way back to the pack house in complete silence, their hands securely locked together over the center console. For the first time in 10 years, Nadine did not feel lonely. Chapter 11. Nadine stood in the second-floor hallway of the pack house, her hands resting firmly on her hips. The heavy oak door leading to the secondary tactical supply room was jammed completely shut. She gripped the cool brass handle and pulled backward with significant force. The thick wood groaned loudly in protest, but the door stubbornly refused to budge. The bottom brass hinge was visibly bent inward, locking the heavy panel securely inside the wooden frame. I will completely dismantle this wooden frame before I ask anyone for help, Nadine promised herself, feeling her independent streak flare up brightly. She tapped her fingernails against the silver tactical stopwatch clipped to her belt, pragmatically analyzing the jammed metal fixture. Footsteps echoed down the quiet corridor. Jason walked around the corner, still wearing the tailored dark suit from their morning summit with Gerald. He had removed his silk tie, and the top 2 buttons of his crisp dress shirt were undone, giving him a relaxed appearance. He stopped a few feet away, crossing his arms as he watched her wage an unwinnable war against the stuck entryway. She looks ready to punch a hole straight through the wood, Jason observed internally, a spark of bright amusement lighting up his piercing gold eyes. If I forcefully open it for her, she will probably kick my shins out of pure spite. It is stuck, Nadine stated firmly, letting go of the brass handle and taking a small step back. I can clearly see that, Jason replied, keeping his tone carefully neutral to avoid triggering her defensive nature. He walked closer, crouching down elegantly to gently inspect the bottom of the wooden frame. He pointed a long, steady finger at the damaged metal. The lower hinge pin is severely twisted. Pulling on the handle will only wedge it tighter into the casing. We need to tap the pin out from the bottom to relieve the pressure. Nadine nodded in immediate agreement, appreciating his logical assessment. There is a utility maintenance closet at the far end of this hall. I will go get the proper tools. She turned on her heel and walked swiftly down the corridor. Opening the small closet door, she reached inside and grabbed a heavy red metal toolbox by its black plastic handle. She carried it back to the jammed door, setting it down on the floorboards with a loud, metallic clatter. Jason stood up to his full height. He unbuttoned his expensive suit jacket, sliding the luxurious garment off his broad shoulders. He draped it carefully over the nearby wooden stair banister to keep it clean from dust. He then rolled up his white sleeves to his elbows, revealing highly muscular forearms. Nadine knelt gracefully beside the toolbox. She unlatched the steel clasps and pulled out a heavy steel hammer and a long, flathead screwdriver. She handed the screwdriver directly to Jason and kept the hammer firmly for herself. Place the flat edge directly under the top lip of the pin, Nadine instructed clearly, pointing to the damaged hinge. Jason crouched down beside her. Their shoulders brushed lightly during the movement, sending a sudden, warm, electric jolt straight up his arm. He ignored the distraction, wedging the steel tip of the screwdriver exactly where she directed. "Ready when you are," Jason confirmed, holding the tool incredibly steady. Nadine raised the steel hammer and brought it down forcefully, striking the plastic handle of the screwdriver with a sharp, precise blow. The metal pin groaned under the sudden impact. She hit it again, swinging significantly harder this time. The twisted pin abruptly popped upward, sliding cleanly out of the brass hinge barrel. "We actually make an incredibly good team," Jason thought, his chest tightening with a deep, genuine affection. Jason reached out and pulled the loose metal pin completely free. He stood up, dropping the broken piece of hardware into his dark trouser pocket for later disposal. "Try the handle now." Nadine stood up, brushing a thin layer of dust from her uniform trousers. She securely gripped the brass handle and pulled. The heavy oak door swung open smoothly, revealing the dimly lit supply room inside. "Highly efficient," Nadine noted, a small, proud smile touching her lips. She bent down, placed the steel hammer back into the red metal toolbox, and snapped the latches tightly shut. Jason handed her the screwdriver, and she quickly packed it away as well. He did not try to take over the situation, Nadine realized internally, her respect for him growing even deeper. He just stepped in and helped me get the job done. "We will leave the door wide open until the quartermaster installs a brand new pin," Jason decided, turning to retrieve his suit jacket from the banister. He slung the expensive garment casually over his shoulder. "I have tedious paperwork to thoroughly review in my office. The torn pieces of Gerald's letter are still sitting directly on my desk, and I need to manually throw them in the trash." Nadine picked up the heavy toolbox by its handle. "Thank you for the quick assist, Alpha." "Anytime, Beta," Jason replied smoothly, offering her a bright, deeply genuine smile before heading confidently down the stairs. Chapter 12. The dispatch center on the main floor of the pack house was entirely quiet. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the large wooden desk. Nadine sat in a sturdy office chair, her heavy canvas gear bag resting cleanly on the floor beside her. Her black two-way radio sat directly in the center of the desk, the small green power light blinking steadily. Jason occupied a chair in the corner of the room. He had changed out of his dark suit and was now wearing highly durable, dark tactical clothing. He held his cell phone, casually scrolling through digital security reports, though his piercing gold eyes frequently darted over to watch Nadine work. Nadine looked down at the silver tactical stopwatch resting in her palm. The digital numbers ticked forward relentlessly. It had been exactly 14 minutes since Scout Bryce had reported in from the dense southern perimeter. Her strict protocols demanded a mandatory vocal check-in every 15 minutes, without exception. "He is usually early to check in," Nadine noted internally, a cold prickle of unease slowly creeping up the back of her neck. "Bryce is meticulous. He does not miss his designated windows." The stopwatch hit the precise 15-minute mark. The black radio on the desk remained completely silent. No static crackled through the external speaker. Nadine waited 30 more seconds to strategically account for minor delays. When the radio still did not broadcast a signal, she reached out and snatched the device from the desk. She pressed the communication button firmly on the side. "Scout Bryce, this is Beta Actual. Radio check. Over?" Nadine spoke clearly into the microphone. She released the button. Only heavy, empty static answered her. Jason immediately set his cell phone down on the nearby table. His relaxed posture vanished instantly, replaced by a rigid, highly focused alertness. He stood up, his broad shoulders squaring as he stepped closer to the dispatch desk. "Try him again," Jason suggested, his voice low and incredibly serious. "Scout Bryce, you have missed your mandatory interval. Respond immediately. Over." Nadine repeated, her tone hardening with distinct authority. Again, nothing but harsh static filled the quiet room. Something is terribly wrong, Nadine thought, her heart rate accelerating sharply. She quickly clipped the radio back onto her belt and securely fastened her silver stopwatch. She reached down, grabbing the strap of her heavy canvas gear bag. She turned directly to the secondary dispatch microphone, permanently mounted to the desk. She pressed the central broadcast button to alert the entire compound. "Head Enforcer Tomas, this is the Beta," Nadine announced loudly, her voice echoing through the building's internal speakers. "We have a missed check-in at the southern grid. Assemble an extraction team and follow standard reinforcement protocols immediately." She released the button and turned to leave. Jason was already walking toward the exit, his strides long and highly purposeful. "I am driving," Jason stated firmly, pointing out toward where his slate-gray SUV was parked. "No, we take my truck," Nadine countered sharply, marching right past him to push the heavy double doors open. "You do not know the southern access trails as intimately as I do. We do not have time to argue." "She is fiercely protective of her people," Jason observed internally, completely dropping the argument. He admired her decisive leadership far too much to hinder it. They jogged quickly across the gravel courtyard, sprinting toward the parked crimson-red Chevrolet Colorado. Nadine pulled her keys from her pocket, unlocking the doors with a sharp electronic chirp. She threw her canvas bag into the back seat and climbed directly behind the leather steering wheel. Jason opened the passenger door and slid inside, forcefully pulling his seatbelt across his chest. He braced his right hand against the dashboard, fully preparing himself for a rough ride. Nadine jammed the key into the ignition. The powerful engine roared to life loudly. She did not hesitate to shift the heavy truck into drive. She slammed her boot down firmly onto the gas pedal. The thick tires violently kicked up dirt and gravel as the vehicle surged forward, tearing out of the compound at a highly dangerous speed. "Hold on," Nadine warned shortly. Her sharp hazel eyes locked intently on the tree line rapidly approaching in the distance. Jason gripped the dashboard tighter, his jaw set perfectly straight. He felt the wild, unpredictable feral instincts deep inside him, actively trying to rise. Fueled by the intense adrenaline, he fought them down forcefully, taking a deep, grounding breath. He focused entirely on the steady, capable woman sitting beside him to keep his mind perfectly clear for the upcoming fight. Chapter 13. The crimson-red Chevrolet Colorado tore violently down the narrow dirt trail, thick branches violently scraping against the side doors. Nadine gripped the steering wheel tightly, navigating the precarious, heavily rutted path with expert precision. The truck violently bounced over a large tree root, tossing Jason slightly in his seat, but his grip on the dashboard remained incredibly firm. "The tracking coordinates end just past this ridge," Nadine stated loudly over the roaring engine, her hazel eyes scanning the dense foliage rapidly passing by. She slammed her foot firmly on the brake pedal, bringing the heavy vehicle to a sharp halt near a thick cluster of ancient pine trees. The heavy off-road tires dug deep trenches directly into the damp soil. Nadine instantly threw the truck into park and unbuckled her seatbelt. She grabbed her heavy canvas gear bag from the back seat, slinging it forcefully over her shoulder before pushing the driver's door open. Jason exited the passenger side simultaneously. The humid afternoon air was thick and heavily still. He immediately stepped carefully around the front of the truck, his gold eyes systematically scanning the dark tree line. He possessed no weapons. He relied entirely on his sheer physical strength and lethal training. Nadine walked briskly to the edge of the clearing, her boots sinking slightly into the soft, dark mud. She crouched down low, tapping her fingernails against her silver stopwatch as she methodically inspected the ground. "Look here," Nadine instructed quietly, pointing a steady finger downward. Jason knelt elegantly beside her. The damp earth was heavily disturbed. Deep, frantic boot prints heavily overlapped with large, highly aggressive wolf tracks. The mud was violently churned up, indicating a sudden, desperate struggle had occurred right where they were currently standing. They ambushed him right on the patrol path, Jason realized internally, a cold, protective anger steadily building within his chest. These rogues are getting significantly bolder. Nadine reached out carefully and plucked an object from a nearby crushed fern. She held up Bryce's standard-issue two-way radio. The tough black plastic casing was severely cracked straight down the middle, and the antenna was completely snapped off. The device was entirely dead, rendered permanently useless by the heavy impact. "He dropped it during the initial struggle," Nadine concluded, her voice remaining pragmatically calm despite her rising fear. She placed the broken radio carefully into the side pocket of her canvas bag to preserve it for later inspection. "Tomas and the enforcers are at least 10 minutes behind us," Jason stated, standing up quickly and looking deeper into the heavily shadowed forest. The trail of disturbed mud aggressively headed directly into a steep, highly dangerous ravine. "We cannot wait for backup. If they dragged him down there, he is running out of time." Nadine stood up, completely agreeing with his tactical assessment. She did not bother replying. She simply started walking rapidly along the damaged trail, following the deep indentations left in the mud. Jason fell into a synchronized step directly beside her, acting as her perfect, heavily vigilant partner. They moved swiftly and silently through the thick underbrush, expertly dodging low-hanging branches and highly uneven terrain. The deeper they successfully ventured into the ravine, the darker the environment actively became. Suddenly, a sharp, highly agonizing cry echoed loudly from the rocky basin just ahead. Bryce, Nadine thought, her protective instincts actively surging directly to the surface. She dropped her heavy canvas bag securely behind a large oak tree to ensure she could move freely, keeping only her silver stopwatch and functional radio attached to her belt. Jason heavily surged forward, taking the direct lead. They quickly crested a steep, rocky embankment and looked directly down into a small, enclosed hollow. Scout Bryce was heavily backed against a solid wall of gray stone. He held a thick wooden branch defensively in his hands, heavily favoring his injured left leg. Surrounding him in a tight, highly coordinated semicircle were 4 large, aggressively snarling rogue wolves. Their fur was heavily matted, and their teeth were fully bared. "Stay behind me," Jason commanded in a low, lethal whisper, entirely dropping the gentle, humorous facade he usually maintained. "We fight together." Nadine countered fiercely, aggressively stepping right up to his side, refusing to hide behind anyone. Jason glanced directly at her, seeing the highly unyielding bravery shining brightly in her sharp hazel eyes. He did not argue. He simply gave her a single, highly respectful nod, fully accepting her as his true equal on the battlefield. Together, they aggressively leaped down the steep rocky bank to engage the enemy. Chapter 14. Jason landed heavily on the rocky floor of the hollow, directly between the 4 rogue wolves and the severely injured scout. The sheer physical impact of his landing sent a spray of loose gravel flying aggressively outward. He straightened up slowly to his full height, projecting an incredibly dominant, highly lethal aura that instantly forced the closest rogue to nervously step backward. Nadine landed flawlessly right beside him. She quickly scanned the highly precarious situation, instantly calculating the odds. 2 rogues on the left flank, 2 on the right. Bryce was entirely trapped directly behind them. "We need to split their focus instantly," Nadine planned internally, her pragmatic mind working incredibly fast. "I will take the smaller 2 on the right. He can handle the heavy hitters." The largest rogue, a heavily built beast with highly scarred gray fur, lunged aggressively forward with a terrifying snarl. Jason moved with astonishing, highly intuitive speed. He sidestepped the violent attack cleanly, grabbing the thick fur on the back of the rogue's neck with his bare hands. He used the animal's own aggressive momentum to heavily throw the beast directly into the solid stone wall. The heavy impact resulted in a sickening crunch, permanently incapacitating the attacker on the spot. Nadine did not hesitate. The 2 rogues on the right aggressively rushed her simultaneously. She expertly ducked under the first snapping jaw, delivering a devastatingly hard, highly precise kick directly to the animal's ribs. The wolf yelped loudly, stumbling sideways. The second wolf highly anticipated her movement, leaping directly toward her chest. Nadine caught the heavy beast aggressively by the throat, using her enhanced beta strength to forcibly slam it down hard onto the rocky ground. She held it pinned tightly, struggling highly against its violently thrashing claws. "She fights flawlessly," Jason noted internally, briefly catching sight of her highly efficient takedown while he actively engaged his second opponent. The remaining wolf fiercely realized it was highly outmatched. Instead of aggressively attacking Jason directly, it cowardly pivoted and viciously lunged straight toward Nadine's exposed blind side while she was currently occupied pinning the other rogue. Jason saw the highly cowardly movement. He did not have time to shout a clear warning. He aggressively abandoned his defensive stance and threw his broad shoulders directly into the path of the leaping wolf. The rogue's sharp claws connected directly with Jason's left shoulder. The incredibly sharp talons tore straight through his durable tactical shirt, slicing viciously into his skin. Jason let out a sharp grunt of pain, but he did not stumble. He grabbed the offending rogue tightly by the scruff, lifting it entirely off the ground, and forcefully hurled it far across the rocky hollow. Nadine finished heavily subduing her opponent, aggressively throwing the highly stunned animal aside. She quickly spun around, breathing heavily, just in time to actively see Jason throw the final rogue. The remaining wolves, deeply terrified by the sheer, highly aggressive display of alpha power, quickly scrambled up the steep dirt embankment and cowardly fled into the dark woods. The hollow fell incredibly silent, save for the heavy, highly ragged breathing of the 3 pack members. "Are you deeply injured, Bryce?" Nadine asked urgently, quick rushing directly over to the heavily exhausted scout leaning heavily against the stone wall. "Twisted my knee badly when they initially ambushed me," Bryce explained breathlessly, heavily clutching his injured leg. "I cannot walk on it securely." Nadine nodded pragmatically, reaching for her silver tactical stopwatch to quickly check the current time. "Tomas is only 2 minutes away. We will transport you directly to the medical wing." She turned rapidly to look at Jason. He was standing completely still, his right hand currently pressing heavily against his left shoulder. Thick, dark blood was steadily soaking directly through the heavily shredded fabric of his tactical shirt, dripping slowly onto the rocky ground. He deliberately took that aggressive hit to violently protect me, Nadine realized internally, her stomach dropping heavily with a sudden, deeply sharp pang of intense fear. She had spent a decade fiercely believing no one would ever take a deeply painful hit for her. Jason caught her highly worried stare. He purposefully dropped his hand from his bleeding shoulder and forcefully offered her a deeply reassuring, highly bright smile.
"It is just a superficial scratch, Beta."
Jason lied smoothly, though his face clearly tightened with intense pain. "Let us actively carry our scout carefully back to the truck." Chapter 15. The brightly lit medical wing of the pack house was sterile and heavily organized. Copeland and Vanessa, the highly overworked pack healers, ran the entire department with incredibly strict authority. The clinic was actively considered purely neutral ground. Rank explicitly meant nothing the moment anyone crossed the polished threshold. Nadine and Jason heavily supported Bryce between them, carefully guiding the limping scout directly through the double doors. Copeland, wearing a pristine white coat, immediately pointed a firm finger directly toward a sturdy medical cot located in the far corner. "Set him down carefully," Copeland instructed briskly, quickly grabbing a digital diagnostic tablet from a nearby metal counter. "What is the specific nature of his current injury?" "Severe twisting trauma to the left knee," Nadine reported, highly efficiently, helping Bryce settle heavily onto the clean mattress. He was violently ambushed by highly aggressive rogues. Vanessa walked swiftly into the main room, carrying a stainless steel tray heavily loaded with clean bandages and highly sterile medical supplies. Her sharp eyes immediately scanned the newly arrived group, instantly locking directly onto Jason's deeply ruined, heavily bleeding tactical shirt. "Alpha," Vanessa scolded sharply, highly displeased by the messy sight. "Sit down on bed 3 immediately. You are actively dripping blood onto my freshly mopped floorboards." Jason did not dare loudly argue with the senior healer. He dutifully walked directly over to the designated bed and sat down heavily on the crinkling paper covering the mattress. Nadine stood highly awkwardly in the center of the sterile room. She gently tapped her fingernails lightly against the silver tactical stopwatch securely clipped to her belt. She felt entirely restless. The intense adrenaline from the recent skirmish was actively fading, heavily leaving her exhausted and deeply worried. "Sit down, Beta," Vanessa ordered firmly, physically pointing to bed number 4, which was located directly adjoining Jason's current spot. "You look incredibly tense. I need to actively ascertain that you do not have a deeply hidden concussion." Nadine highly reluctantly obeyed, sitting down heavily on the adjoining sterile bed. Vanessa aggressively pulled a small pair of highly sharp medical scissors from her shiny steel tray. She walked directly over to Jason and rapidly cut the remaining heavily ruined fabric entirely away from his left shoulder. The 3 deep, highly vicious claw marks, actively fully exposed, were clearly heavily inflamed and steadily bleeding. "This actively requires highly precise stitching," Vanessa announced pragmatically, quickly reaching for a highly sterile cleaning wipe. "Hold perfectly still." Nadine turned her head slightly, closely watching Vanessa expertly clean the deep wounds. She watched Jason's highly sharp jawline clenched tightly in highly suppressed pain as the harsh antiseptic actively hit his torn skin. He had intentionally taken that brutal strike, explicitly to keep her entirely safe from a cowardly blindside attack. He literally bled heavily for me, Nadine thought, the highly heavy realization fully settling incredibly deep inside her chest. Gerald violently threw me fiercely to the wolves for deeply selfish power. Jason aggressively threw himself violently at the wolves directly for me. Jason slowly turned his head to heavily look directly at her. They sat quietly on the tightly adjoining sterile beds, entirely surrounded by the clinical smell of sharp antiseptic and clean linens. The incredibly loud noise of Copeland aggressively treating Bryce actively faded entirely into the distant background. Jason locked his piercing gold eyes directly onto her sharp hazel eyes. The powerful chemistry actively flowing forcefully between them was highly palpable and deeply electric. He intentionally did not hide behind his highly playful humor, nor did he forcefully project his deeply terrifying feral act. He simply looked directly at her with entirely raw, deeply unshielded vulnerability. I am so incredibly deeply terrified of completely losing her, Jason realized internally, his rapidly beating heart pounding heavily against his ribs. Nadine did not nervously look away. She actively held his deeply intense gaze, her heavily built independent walls finally crumbling entirely to the sterile floor. She slowly lifted her right hand and gently rested it cleanly on the very edge of his sterile mattress, highly intentionally offering a deeply quiet gesture of genuine, highly profound support. Jason slowly reached his uninjured right hand across the small, highly sterile gap. He securely wrapped his incredibly long fingers gently around hers. I am entirely perfectly fine, Nadine, Jason whispered incredibly softly, actively speaking entirely only for her to clearly hear. I know, Nadine whispered back quietly, gently squeezing his heavily calloused hand securely. Because I actively securely have your back. Chapter 16. Nadine stepped out of the sterile medical wing, the heavy doors swinging softly shut behind her. The corridor was quiet, smelling faintly of lemon cleaner. Head enforcer Tomas stood leaning against the painted plaster wall, holding her familiar, heavy canvas gear bag. The durable fabric was slightly splattered with dried mud from the ravine. I dispatched a recovery team to secure the southern perimeter, Tomas reported, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He held the thick strap out to her. One of my scouts found this safely tucked behind a large oak tree. Bryce's broken two-way radio is still sitting securely in the side pocket. Thank you, Tomas, Nadine replied cleanly, taking the heavy bag and slinging it over her right shoulder. She tapped her fingernails lightly against her silver tactical stopwatch, her pragmatic mind quickly sorting her next tasks. Increase the border patrols by 2 full rotations. The rogues are getting incredibly brave. Tomas gave a sharp nod and strode efficiently down the hall. Nadine glanced back toward the medical wing doors. Jason was still sitting on cot number 3. Vanessa had expertly stitched the 3 deep claw marks on his left shoulder, securing a square white bandage tightly over the wounded skin. However, his dark tactical shirt was entirely destroyed, cut to ribbons, and thrown in the clinic's biohazard bin. The Alpha could not walk through the main compound half naked without raising severe panic among the pack members. He needs a clean shirt before we leave this neutral ground, Nadine decided internally. I am not letting the younger scout see him bleeding. She walked swiftly up the main staircase, heading directly to the Alpha's private office. The heavy wooden door was unlocked. She pushed it open, stepping into the quiet, sunlit room. The afternoon light spilled directly over the large oak desk. Resting right in the center of the polished wood were the 2 torn halves of the cream-colored envelope from Gerald. They had remained exactly where she had ripped them the previous day. Nadine ignored the ruined letter. She walked past the desk toward a tall, dark wooden cabinet, tucked securely into the far corner of the room. Jason often kept spare training clothes stored there for late-night workouts. She reached out, gripping the brass handle, and pulled the tall door open. She froze completely. The cabinet did not hold standard training gear. Neatly folded on the middle wooden shelf was the exceptionally soft, slate-gray blanket she had tried to wash. Folded directly beneath it was her dark blue, woven wool scarf, the exact one Ripley had claimed in the kitchen. Hanging neatly on a polished wooden hanger was her heavy winter coat, an item she had assumed she lost months ago during a severe snowstorm. Nadine reached out slowly, her fingers brushing the thick fabric of her missing winter coat. A distinct sense of deep confusion flooded her mind. Why does the Alpha have an entire wardrobe of my discarded clothing hidden in his private office? Nadine thought, her heart rate accelerating sharply. Heavy, familiar footsteps sounded in the hallway, the office door pushed wider. Jason walked into the room, his broad shoulders filling the frame. He was still entirely shirtless, the stark white bandage covering his injured left shoulder. As he stepped forward, the spare keys residing in his dark tactical trouser pocket clinked softly against his leg. Jason stopped dead in his tracks. His piercing gold eyes locked instantly onto the open cabinet door, and then shifted to Nadine, who was currently holding her stolen winter coat. I am completely ruined, Jason realized internally, a sudden, cold panic gripping his chest tightly. She found the hoard. Beta, Jason started, his voice incredibly tight, entirely stripping away his usual dry humor. Nadine turned to face him slowly. She held the heavy coat in her hands, her sharp hazel eyes narrowing with intense scrutiny. She did not yell, nor did she act afraid. She simply looked at the hidden collection of her personal items, and then looked directly at the powerful leader standing before her. Jason, Nadine said softly, demanding strict accountability. Why is my missing winter coat locked securely inside your private cabinet? Chapter 17. The silence in the Alpha's office was suffocatingly thick. Dust motes drifted lazily through the beams of afternoon sunlight, completely contrasting the intense, high-stakes tension gripping the two wolves. Jason stood rigidly near the doorway, his bare chest rising and falling with shallow, guarded breaths. The sharp pain from his fresh stitches barely registered against the heavy dread pulling directly in his stomach. Nadine did not break eye contact. She stood tall, her posture unyielding. She slowly draped her heavy winter coat over the back of a nearby leather chair, carefully creating distance between herself and the stolen garments. He looks genuinely terrified, Nadine observed internally, studying the tight clench of his sharp jawline. But I need the truth, not excuses. I need an explanation, Alpha, Nadine prompted smoothly, her tone leaving entirely no room for deflection. Jason ran his right hand roughly across the back of his neck, struggling highly to find the correct words. The fierce, terrifying, feral act he had expertly utilized during council meetings was completely useless here. I am not losing my mind, Jason finally confessed, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He took one slow step toward the center of the room. The feral regression. It is an exaggeration. The elders are aggressively pushing a treaty. It is a highly lucrative contract worth $500,000, requiring me to mate with a neighboring Alpha's daughter. The only way to securely dodge the paperwork without sparking a political war was to prove I was too mentally unstable to sign it. Nadine stared at him, processing the sheer magnitude of his deception. You faked a feral state? You knowingly let your entire pack believe you are a dangerous liability just to avoid a marriage arrangement? I did it to protect my choice. Jason countered quickly, stepping closer, his gold eyes pleading with her to understand. But the anxiety of leading this pack is entirely real. The pressure is crushing. The only thing that actively keeps my mind clear and grounds my instincts is you. He gestured heavily toward the open wooden cabinet. Your grounding presence. I hoarded your discarded jackets and that slate-gray blanket because being surrounded by things that belong to you is the only remedy that actually works. When you washed that blanket, my panic was not an act. I genuinely thought I had lost the only lifeline I had. Nadine crossed her arms tightly over her chest. The pragmatic, logical side of her brain clearly understood the overwhelming burdens of leadership. However, the deeply scarred, betrayed woman residing underneath her tough exterior felt an icy chill wash over her skin. He built our recent partnership on a foundation of deliberate lies, Nadine thought, the old wounds from Gerald's betrayal violently stinging her heart. He used a fabricated story to force his way into my truck and my patrols. You lied to me, Nadine stated, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet whisper. You sat right next to me in my Chevrolet, commending my hard work. while actively playing a highly calculated game. You knew I despised deception. You knew exactly what Gerald did to me to secure his own power, and you chose to manipulate my empathy anyway. Nadine, no. Jason argued desperately, reaching his right hand out toward her. The respect I have for you is entirely genuine. Taking that hit in the ravine for you today was real. I hid the clothing because I was incredibly terrified that if I told you the truth, your fierce independence would cause you to run away from me. She is looking at me like I am a stranger, Jason realized internally, his heart sinking heavily. Nadine took a deliberate step backward, cleanly avoiding his outstretched hand. The emotional vulnerability they had briefly shared in the sterile medical clinic entirely evaporated, replaced by her highly familiar, impenetrable defensive walls. I require strict accountability in all my dealings, Jason, professional and personal, Nadine declared coldly. She reached down, grabbing her heavy. Nadine stood firmly in the center of the ring, wearing dark tactical trousers and a simple gray t-shirt. Her russet hair was tied back in a highly practical, tight knot. She moved with fluid, lethal precision, aggressively blocking a high-sweeping kick from Katrine. Nadine pivoted smoothly on her heel, securely grabbing Katrine's wrist, and used her momentum to cleanly throw the loud tracker directly onto the hard dirt. Katrine landed with a loud, breathless grunt, a thick cloud of dust kicking up into the air. Your guard drops the second you initiate a strike, Nadine instructed sternly, offering a hand to pull her loyal friend back to her feet. If you face a rogue, that opening will cost you your life. Reset and try again. From the raised wooden porch of the main pack house, Jason watched the sparring session in complete silence. He wore a fresh, dark gray tactical shirt, the fabric resting loosely over the bulky white bandage, securely protecting his injured left shoulder. His piercing gold eyes followed Nadine's every efficient movement. It had been entirely 2 days since the confrontation in his private office, and she had expertly avoided him at every single turn. She submitted her perimeter reports through Tomas and restricted her radio communication strictly to necessary tactical updates. I cannot simply order her to speak to me, Jason calculated internally, gripping the wooden porch railing tightly with his uninjured right hand. If I use my alpha rank to force a conversation, I will permanently destroy whatever fragile trust remains. A sudden, loud clatter near the edge of the training yard drew his attention. Ripley, the sassy tortoiseshell cat, had successfully stalked her way into the active training grounds. The feline sat proudly on top of a wooden supply crate, her bright yellow eyes locked on the Carl. As the reliable pack warrior jogged backward during a defensive drill, Ripley intentionally launched herself forward. The cat darted directly between Carl's heavy combat boots, aggressively tangling herself in his stride. Carl yelped, losing his balance completely, and fell backward into a muddy puddle with a loud, highly undignified splash. Ripley calmly trotted over to the fallen warrior, gracefully hopped directly onto his muddy chest, and began casually cleaning her front paw, entirely ignoring his annoyed groans. Nadine paused her sparring match, her sharp hazel eyes catching the ridiculous scene. A small, genuine smile briefly broke through her highly guarded expression before she quickly forced it away, turning back to Katrina to continue the brutal drills. Jason let out a slow, quiet breath. He turned away from the railing and walked back into the pack house, heading straight for his office. He sat down heavily at the large oak desk. The torn pieces of the cream-colored letter from Gerald were finally gone, having been swept neatly into the trash bin by the cleaning staff. He reached into the top drawer and pulled out a single sheet of pristine, heavy paper and a black ink pen. He knew exactly what he needed to do. He could not win her back with clever humor or physical dominance. He needed to meet her strictly on her terms. Jason spent the next hour carefully drafting a deeply formal, highly honest letter. He documented his deception without a single excuse, fully admitting his fear of her rejection. He did not beg for immediate forgiveness. He strictly offered complete transparency moving forward. Once the ink was dry, he folded the heavy paper carefully. He walked down to the dispatch center, which was currently empty. He placed the folded letter directly in the center of Nadine's desk, resting it carefully next to the charging station for her black two-way radio. He turned and left the room, leaving the next strategic move entirely in her capable hands. Chapter 19. The sun was dipping heavily below the dense tree line, casting long, dark shadows across the southern compound gate. Nadine leaned casually against the passenger door of her crimson-red Chevrolet Colorado. The heavy off-road tires were slightly caked with fresh dirt from her evening perimeter check. She held the folded piece of heavy paper in her hands. She had read Jason's handwritten letter 3 times since finding it on her dispatch desk. He took complete ownership of the deception, Nadine thought, tracing her fingernail lightly over the dark black ink. There are no deflections, no attempts to leverage his alpha authority to force compliance. He wrote this entirely as an equal. The crunch of gravel alerted her. Jason walked slowly toward the parked truck. The fading sunlight caught the gold in his eyes, but his posture was highly restrained. He stopped a respectful distance away, ensuring he did not trap her against the vehicle. "Evening, Beta," Jason greeted quietly, his voice carrying a deeply sincere tone. "Alpha," Nadine replied smoothly. She did not cross her arms. Instead, she deliberately folded the heavy letter and slipped it securely into her front pocket. She looked directly at him, her sharp hazel eyes assessing his calm demeanor. "Your penmanship is surprisingly neat for a man who regularly throws wolves into stone walls." Jason let out a small, highly relieved breath, recognizing the subtle return of her witty banter. He did not smile, keeping his focus entirely serious. "I meant every single word written on that paper, Nadine," Jason stated firmly. "I manipulated the situation because I was incredibly foolish. You possess more integrity than anyone I have ever met, and I deeply disrespected that. I am entirely accountable for the lie." Nadine tapped her fingernails against the silver tactical stopwatch clipped to her belt. She analyzed his apology, searching for any hidden traps or lingering arrogance. She found 0 traces of it. The man standing before her was offering complete vulnerability, a highly rare trait for a powerful leader. "He is nothing like Gerald," Nadine finally accepted, the heavy, icy knot in her chest fully dissolving. "Gerald ran away when things became difficult. Jason is standing right here, actively repairing the damage." "I accept the apology, Jason," Nadine said clearly, her voice steady and highly resolute. "But the hidden cabinet stays empty. If you need something from me, you look me directly in the eye and ask for it. No more shadows, no more games."
"You have my word,"
Jason promised, taking one slow step closer. The intense, highly magnetic chemistry between them flared up instantly, replacing the cold tension with a deeply warm electric pull. He wanted nothing more than to reach out and pull her against his chest, but he strictly held his ground. Nadine allowed a genuine warm smile to touch her lips. She reached out, lightly brushing her fingertips against the uninjured side of his dark gray tactical shirt. The brief contact sent a hot jolt straight through his muscles. "Good," Nadine concluded pragmatically, stepping back to break the intense physical tension. "Because we have highly pressing issues to discuss." Bryce confirmed the rogues who ambushed him were carrying coordinated grid maps. They are actively planning a large-scale, structured breach, not a random raid. We need to formulate a defensive strategy immediately. Jason smoothly shifted his mindset from a deeply remorseful partner back to a highly lethal pack leader. He nodded sharply, the sharp angles of his jawline setting with intense focus. "Assemble the senior warriors in the war room," Jason commanded efficiently, turning to walk back toward the compound. "We map the perimeter defenses tonight." Chapter 20. The war room was incredibly warm, heavily illuminated by the bright overhead industrial lights. A gigantic, highly detailed topographical map of the pack's territory was spread completely across the large oak table. Heavy brass markers weighed down the curling corners of the thick paper. Nadine stood on the left side of the table, her hands resting firmly on the polished wood. She had successfully retrieved her heavy canvas gear bag, currently resting cleanly on the floor near her boots. Katrina, Tomas, and Andrew stood closely around the edges of the room, their expressions entirely grim as they listened to the strategic briefing. Jason stood directly across from Nadine. He leaned slightly over the table, using his right hand to aggressively slide a small red marker toward the southern riverbank. "The rogues hit Bryce here," Jason pointed out, his tone entirely clinical and sharp. "It was a targeted strike to test our response time. If they possess grid maps, they know our shift changes. They will highly likely aim for the eastern ridge where the tree cover is significantly thicker. I agree, Nadine stated, tapping her fingernails against the edge of the oak table. I will personally take Katrine and Andrew to secure the eastern flank. Tomas, you hold the main gates with the heavy enforcers. As they actively debated the tactical coordinates, the highly palpable chemistry between Jason and Nadine heavily saturated the small room. Every time she spoke, Jason found his gold eyes drifting from the map directly to the light dusting of freckles across her nose. When he leaned forward, Nadine caught herself intensely studying the sharp, strong lines of his shoulders, highly aware of the fresh stitches hidden securely beneath his gray shirt. Focus on the map, Nadine, she scolded herself internally, forcefully tearing her gaze away from his hands. You cannot afford to be distracted right now. Jason was fighting a highly similar internal battle. Knowing that she had fully forgiven him made his protective instincts surge wildly. He wanted to cancel the patrols and lock her safely inside the compound, but he knew she would fiercely despise him for it. She was a beta. She belonged directly on the front lines. We rotate communications every 10 minutes instead of 15. Jason added smoothly, his eyes locking onto hers. I want a constant, unbroken stream of audio from your team, Nadine. If the radio cuts to static for even 10 seconds, I am personally sending the enforcers. Nadine offered a highly confident, sharp smirk. You worry entirely too much, Alpha. My truck is fully gassed, and my team is ready. Before Jason could deliver a witty reply, a deafening, incredibly shrill noise violently shattered the quiet focus of the war room. The perimeter breach alarm securely mounted to the compound walls began screaming loudly, flashing bright red warning lights across the plaster walls. The highly aggressive sound echoed violently through the entire pack house. Nadine instantly grabbed her black two-way radio from her belt, pressing the receiver tightly to her ear. Harsh, panic static aggressively blasted through the small speaker. Beta Actual, we have a breach! A frantic scout yelled over the radio, the loud sounds of violently snarling wolves echoing terrifyingly in the background. They hit the southern grid. There are dozens of them. We are heavily overrun. Nadine slammed the radio back onto her belt. She reached down, forcefully grabbing the strap of her heavy canvas gear bag. They completely bypassed the eastern ridge, Nadine shouted over the blaring sirens, her hazel eyes blazing with pure, highly lethal adrenaline. Jason was already moving. He bypassed the large oak table entirely, his broad shoulders squared and ready for total war. He threw open the heavy war room doors, completely abandoning the safety of the compound.
Move out!
Jason roared, his highly authoritative command echoing above the alarms.
Defend the South!
Chapter 21. Nadine sprinted out of the pack house, her boots kicking up dirt and loose gravel. She carried her heavy canvas gear bag in her left hand and clutched her black two-way radio securely in her right. The blaring compound sirens echoed sharply against the dark trees, drowning out the normal evening sounds. She reached her crimson-red Chevrolet Colorado and threw the heavy canvas bag into the passenger seat. She did not bother turning the key in the ignition. Driving the noisy truck into the thick forest would instantly give away her exact position. Instead, she clipped the radio firmly to her belt and drew a long, heavy hunting knife she kept stored in the truck's console. She turned and ran directly toward the dense tree line of the southern grid. If they break past this tree line, they will easily reach the nurseries. Nadine calculated grimly, her sharp hazel eyes scanning the dark shadows. I will bleed out on this dirt before I let a single rogue touch our pups. She crested a steep hill and dropped low to the ground. The southern clearing was entirely chaotic. A pack of 12 enraged, highly aggressive rogue wolves tore through the underbrush. They were large, highly coordinated, and moving with lethal intent. 3 of her younger scouts were desperately holding a defensive line near a rocky outcrop, heavily outnumbered. Nadine did not hesitate. She charged straight down the hill, tapping her silver tactical stopwatch once for luck. She cleanly vaulted over a fallen log and drove her heavy boot directly into the ribs of a leaping rogue. The animal yelped sharply, tumbling sideways into the damp soil. She spun around, her knife glinting in the faint moonlight, and slashed defensively to keep a second wolf at bay. She stood tall in front of the exhausted scouts, projecting pure beta authority. A terrifying, deep roar shook the clearing. Jason erupted from the forest behind her. He did not wear a jacket, leaving his dark gray tactical shirt exposed to the cold evening air. He carried no weapons. His gold eyes blazed with intense, calculated brilliance. He did not act like a wild, unhinged beast. He was highly observant, instantly analyzing the enemy's flanks and weaknesses. I want to lock her safely in a vault, Jason thought, his heart drumming violently as he watched Nadine fend off 2 large wolves simultaneously. But she is a fierce warrior, and I must let her lead. Fall back to the rocks, Jason commanded loudly, his voice carrying unmistakable alpha power. He purposely favored his injured left shoulder, stepping sharply to the side to avoid a lunging rogue, then drove his right fist downward in a devastating hammer strike that grounded the beast instantly. Nadine, secure the left flank. Do not let them circle behind the scouts. Nadine nodded sharply, her russet hair flying as she smoothly pivoted. She appreciated his clear, highly logical directions. He was not trying to protect her ego. He was utilizing her exact skills to win the fight. Left flank is mine, Alpha, Nadine shouted back, kicking dirt into the face of an advancing rogue. She moved with synchronized, highly fluid grace, expertly keeping the enemies contained. The rogues realized they were facing the true leaders of the pack. The largest of the enemy wolves snapped its jaws loudly, signaling for a highly coordinated rush. 5 large beasts charged directly at Jason and Nadine at the exact same time. The sheer volume of attackers was overwhelming. We are heavily outnumbered right now, Nadine realized, her muscles burning with intense fatigue as she braced for the harsh impact. Where is the backup? Before the rogues could close the final distance, a loud, highly aggressive howl echoed from the eastern ridge. Help had finally arrived. Chapter 22. Head Enforcer. Tomas burst into the clearing like a highly destructive force of nature. He was closely followed by Katrine, Mammond, and Rose. Because Nadine had strictly instituted the 10-minute radio check-ins, the enforcers knew the precise coordinates of the breach and arrived exactly on time. Tomas slammed his entire body weight into the largest rogue, sending both of them tumbling heavily into the thick bushes. Katrine let out a loud, highly enthusiastic battle cry, jumping directly into the fray to assist the exhausted scouts. My protocols actually worked flawlessly, Nadine observed internally, a brief spark of fierce pride lighting up her chest despite the intense danger. We are not going to lose this territory.
Hold the perimeter!
Jason yelled over the chaotic snarling, his sharp jawline tight with intense concentration. He expertly ducked under a snapping jaw, cleanly sweeping the legs out from under a highly aggressive rogue. He stayed constantly moving, ensuring no enemy could target his freshly stitched left shoulder. Nadine fought strictly by his side. They moved in total harmony, deeply in sync without needing to speak a single word. When a rogue attempted to aggressively blindside Jason from the left, Nadine smoothly stepped into the gap, driving the heavy hilt of her hunting knife into the animal's snout. When Nadine was momentarily unbalanced by a shifting rock, Jason instantly stepped forward, using his broad chest to block an incoming attack. She anticipates every single move I make, Jason marveled silently, his gold eyes tracking her fluid defense. We are an incredibly perfect team. The battle raged fiercely for 10 more minutes. The dirt was violently churned up, and the cold air tasted distinctly of sweat and pine needles. The reliable pack warriors systematically dismantled the rogue offensive. Mammond and Rose worked together to cleanly subdue 2 heavily scarred attackers near the rocky outcrop. Katrine fiercely guarded the eastern trail, refusing to yield a single inch of ground. Realizing their coordinated strike had completely failed, the remaining rogues broke their aggressive formation. The surviving enemies cowardly scrambled back into the dark woods, their tails tucked securely between their legs. Thomas stood tall, wiping a smear of dirt from his forehead. "Pursue them to the river boundary," he commanded his enforcers. "Ensure they leave our lands entirely." The clearing fell quiet, save for the heavy, ragged breathing of the victorious pack members. Nadine lowered her hunting knife. Her gray t-shirt was stained heavily with mud and dirt, and a small, highly superficial scrape marked her left cheekbone. She leaned over slightly, resting her hand squarely on her knees as she caught her breath. Jason walked slowly over to her. His dark gray shirt was ruined, highly ripped near the hem, but the white bandage on his shoulder had thankfully held firm. His chest heaved with intense exertion. He stopped right in front of her, his piercing gold eyes searching her face carefully for any signs of serious injury. He looks completely exhausted, but incredibly handsome, Nadine thought, straightening up to meet his intense gaze. And he did not treat me like a fragile liability once during that entire fight. Jason reached out with his right hand. He gently brushed a stray lock of russet hair away from her face, his fingertips lightly grazing her dirt-smudged cheek. "You fought brilliantly, Beta," Jason praised softly, his voice a low, highly intimate rumble. "You lead brilliantly, Alpha," Nadine replied, offering him a bright, deeply genuine smile. Chapter 23. The medical wing was brilliantly bright, completely sterilized, and smelled heavily of sharp cleaning alcohol. Copeland and Vanessa ran the emergency room with highly strict efficiency, expertly directing the incoming warriors to available cots. Nadine sat on the edge of a clean, paper-lined bed. She had securely holstered her hunting knife and left her black radio on a nearby counter. Vanessa stood directly in front of her, aggressively holding a highly saturated cotton swab. "Hold perfectly still," Vanessa ordered sharply. She pressed the harsh antiseptic wipe directly against the small scrape on Nadine's cheekbone. Nadine winced slightly, tapping her fingernails against the edge of the metal cot to strictly control her flinching. "Vanessa enjoys this entirely too much," Nadine mused internally, her sharp hazel eyes darting across the busy room. "She uses the strongest chemicals just to ensure we never want to get injured again." Jason sat exactly one bed over. Copeland was currently inspecting the Alpha's left shoulder. He carefully peeled back the edges of the white bandage to check the fresh stitches. "The sutures held securely, Alpha," Copeland declared, sounding highly surprised. "Though your dark tactical shirt is entirely ruined again, you need to actively stop treating your clothing as disposable armor." "Noted, Copeland," Jason replied smoothly, offering the highly overworked healer a highly respectful nod. He turned his head, locking his piercing gold eyes directly onto Nadine. The adrenaline from the intense forest skirmish was finally draining away, leaving behind a profoundly deep, highly electric tension between them. The emotional walls Nadine had fiercely maintained for 10 long years were entirely demolished. Surviving the brutal fight side by side had cemented an undeniable, incredibly raw trust. "She is looking at me." Without any hesitation. Jason realized silently, his heartbeat quickening significantly. There are no more games. No more shadows. Just us. Vanessa tossed the used cotton swab directly into a silver bin. "You are completely cleared, Beta. Take a hot shower and get some genuine rest. Do not engage in heavy lifting for 24 hours. Nadine stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from her dirty trousers. She felt highly exhausted, but her mind was incredibly clear. She walked directly over to Jason's cot, not caring who in the room was actively watching them. She stopped inches away from his knees. "Are you cleared to leave the neutral ground?" Nadine asked quietly, her voice carrying a highly gentle, inviting tone. Jason stood up immediately. He was easily a full head taller than her, his broad shoulders casting a highly comforting shadow over her frame. "Copeland just gave me the official release. I am perfectly fine." I would follow her straight back into the woods right now if she asked, Jason thought, keeping his right hand carefully at his side to avoid reaching for her in the highly public clinic. "Good," Nadine stated clearly, looking up into his gold eyes. "Walk with me." They left the brightly lit medical wing together, stepping into the quiet, heavily shadowed hallways of the main pack house. The remaining pack members were currently busy securing the grounds, leaving the upper residential floors completely deserted. They walked in total silence, the soft thud of their boots echoing clearly against the wooden floorboards. The intense chemistry actively simmering between them felt incredibly heavy and entirely intoxicating. Jason led her directly to the heavy oak door of his private quarters. He reached out and pushed the handle, holding the door wide open for her to step inside. Chapter 24. Jason's private quarters were highly spacious and incredibly warm. A large, comfortable bed sat in the center of the room, covered with thick, dark blankets. A low light burned steadily on the corner desk, casting a highly soft, golden glow across the polished wooden furniture. Nadine stepped inside, her boots highly silent on the plush carpet. She turned around slowly as Jason pushed the heavy oak doors shut behind them. The distinct click of the latch sounded incredibly loud in the quiet sanctuary. He stayed entirely near the door. He leaned his broad shoulders against the solid wood, watching her intently. He was trying highly to be respectful of her fiercely independent nature, entirely terrified of moving too fast and scaring her away. If I crossed this room without an invitation, she might push me away. Jason worried internally, his sharp jawline tight with heavy restraint. I must let her set the exact pace. Nadine stood near the center of the room. She looked at his highly guarded posture, recognizing the deep care and intense respect radiating fiercely from him. For a decade, she had fiercely guarded her heart, demanding total accountability and expecting eventual betrayal. But looking at Jason now, she felt deeply secure. He had actively bled for her, praised her highly in front of the elders, and fully respected her hard-earned rank. She reached up, her fingers finding the highly practical, tight knot holding her russet hair. She pulled the band loose, letting her hair fall heavily around her shoulders in soft waves. I am tired of being entirely alone, Nadine admitted silently, a highly profound sense of relief washing cleanly over her. I am safe here. He is completely safe. Nadine took a highly deliberate step forward, then another. She crossed the plush carpet smoothly, stopping barely an inch away from his chest. She tilted her head up, her sharp hazel eyes locking directly onto his piercing gold gaze. The air between them was incredibly thick, heavily saturated with unspoken promises and deeply raw desire. You are standing incredibly far away, Alpha, Nadine whispered softly, her voice carrying a highly playful, deeply affectionate edge. Jason swallowed hard. His heart hammered wildly against his ribs. He slowly lifted his uninjured right hand, bringing it up to gently cup the side of her face. His thumb lightly traced the edge of her jawline, completely avoiding the highly fresh scrape on her cheek. I did not want to aggressively crowd you, Jason replied, his voice a deeply low, incredibly rough rumble. You have fiercely defended your space for 10 years. I will never take it from you without permission. The deeply considerate statement hit Nadine directly in the heart. She lifted both of her hands, resting her palms entirely flat against his chest. She could feel his rapid, highly erratic heartbeat drumming securely beneath his dark gray shirt. I'm done fighting you, Jason, Nadine declared clearly, her voice entirely steady and deeply resolute. She let her highly impenetrable shield drop completely to the floor. You have my permission. You have all of it. Jason let out a deeply shaky breath. All of his heavy restraint vanished entirely. He leaned down, bridging the highly agonizing gap between them, and pressed his lips fiercely against hers. Chapter 25. The kiss was incredibly intense, hungry, and deeply desperate. The lingering adrenaline from the forest skirmish transformed instantly into pure, searing heat between them. Jason wrapped his strong right arm securely around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. He was highly mindful of his freshly stitched left shoulder, keeping that arm carefully lowered at his side to avoid tearing the sutures. Nadine sighed softly into his mouth, rising onto her toes. She slid her hands up his torso, tracing the hard, rigid planes of his muscles. Jason walked her backward, his movements entirely fluid and synchronized with hers. The back of Nadine's knees hit the edge of the large, comfortable bed. She broke the kiss gently, highly breathless. Her sharp hazel eyes were entirely dark with intense desire. I never knew letting go of control could feel this incredibly right, Nadine realized silently. Jason looked down at her, his gold eyes blazing brightly in the soft light of the room. He reached down with his right hand and firmly grasped the hem of her muddy gray t-shirt. Let's get rid of this, Jason whispered, his voice a low, rough rumble. Nadine lifted her arms, allowing him to pull the dirty fabric over her head. He dropped it carelessly onto the plush carpet. She stood before him in a simple black sports bra and tactical trousers. Jason's gaze roamed over her athletic frame, completely captivated. He reached out, his fingertips lightly tracing the line of her collarbone, causing a sharp shiver to trail straight down her spine. Nadine reached for his belt, her clever fingers quickly undoing the heavy metal buckle. She pushed his dark tactical trousers down, and he stepped out of them, kicking his boots aside. He stood before her, proud and highly aroused, his deep physical need for her fully evident. Nadine's breath hitched in her throat. She had spent a decade building thick defensive walls, but looking at the powerful alpha who had bled to protect her, she wanted nothing more than to tear those walls down entirely. Jason gently pushed her shoulders, guiding her to lay back against the thick, dark blankets. The mattress dipped under his weight as he followed her down, straddling her hips. He braced his upper body weight entirely on his right forearm, hovering above her. He leaned down, pressing soft, searing kisses along her jawline, carefully avoiding the highly fresh scrape on her left cheek. His warm lips trailed down her neck, finding the highly sensitive hollow of her throat. Nadine arched her back, letting out a soft, breathy moan that echoed loudly in the quiet bedroom. "You are incredibly beautiful," Jason murmured against her warm skin. He expertly unhooked her bra, tossing the garment aside. His warm right hand cupped her bare breast, his thumb brushing slowly over the tightening peak. Nadine gasped sharply, tangling her fingers securely into the dark hair at the nape of his neck. She pulled his head up, capturing his lips in another highly demanding kiss. Their tongues tangled lazily at first, then, with rapidly increasing urgency. He moved his hand lower, tracing the thick waistband of her trousers. With smooth, practiced movements, he helped her shed the remaining layers of her clothing. Skin finally met skin, the highly intoxicating friction of his muscled chest pressing firmly against her bare breasts sent waves of intense heat straight to her core. Jason trailed hot, open-mouthed kisses down her stomach, making her abdominal muscles flutter helplessly under his expert touch. When his fingers found her deeply sensitive center, Nadine cried out his name, her hips instinctively bucking upward toward his hand. Jason watched her facial expressions carefully, highly addicted to the way her hazel eyes fluttered shut in pure, unadulterated pleasure. He stroked her expertly, building the deep electric tension inside her until she was trembling, her nails lightly scratching the uninjured side of his back. "Jason, please," she begged quietly, completely stripping away her tough exterior. She needed him closer. She wanted the final barrier gone entirely. Jason shifted his weight, smoothly moving between her thighs. "She is finally mine," Jason thought, his mind spinning with pure euphoria. "I will spend the rest of my life proving she made the right choice." He looked directly into her eyes, silently asking for her final permission. Nadine gave a highly resolute nod, wrapping her long legs securely around his waist. He entered her slowly, groaning deeply at the tight, incredibly warm friction. Nadine let out a sharp gasp, adjusting to his impressive size. Jason held entirely still for a brief moment, letting her body accept him fully. He leaned down, resting his forehead gently against hers. "I have waited years for this," he whispered heavily. He began to move, setting a slow, highly deliberate rhythm. Each deep thrust drew a highly vocal moan from Nadine. The intense physical connection beautifully matched the profound emotional bond they had forged. The pace quickened, becoming deeply desperate. Jason's right hand gripped her hip securely, anchoring her to him as the intense pleasure built rapidly toward a shattering peak. Nadine clung to him, entirely surrendering her heart and body. As the brilliant wave of climax washed cleanly over her, she cried out, her entire frame shaking violently. Jason followed a second later, a deeply feral groan tearing from his throat as he poured his deep affection into her, cementing their highly unbreakable bond. Chapter 26. The early morning sunlight filtered gently through the thick curtains of the Alpha's private quarters, casting a warm, golden glow across the plush carpet. Nadine slowly opened her sharp hazel eyes, her vision adjusting to the quiet, highly peaceful room. She was lying securely against Jason's uninjured right side, her head resting comfortably on his heavily muscled chest. The thick, dark blankets were tangled around their legs, a quiet testament to the deeply passionate night they had just shared. "I actually slept through the entire night without waking up on high alert," Nadine realized internally, a profound sense of genuine safety washing over her. For a decade, she had slept with one eye open, fiercely guarding her independence. Today, the heavy burdens of her past felt entirely gone. She tilted her head upward. Jason was already awake. His piercing gold eyes were fixed directly on her face, watching her with a highly intense, deeply reverent expression. His ruffled dark hair fell lazily across his forehead, giving him a highly relaxed appearance. "Good morning," Jason whispered, his voice a deeply low, incredibly warm rumble that vibrated directly against her cheek. "Good morning," Nadine replied softly, offering him a bright, genuine smile. She carefully shifted her weight, highly mindful of his injured left shoulder. The stark white bandage covering his fresh stitches remained perfectly intact, though the surrounding skin looked slightly bruised from the intense skirmish. She lightly traced her fingertips across his right collarbone. "How is the shoulder?" Jason offered a highly dismissive, gentle shrug with his uninjured side.
"It is perfectly fine. Copeland does excellent stitch work. How is your cheek?"
Nadine lightly touched the minor, superficial scrape on her left cheekbone. The harsh antiseptic Vanessa had aggressively applied the night before had done its job. The small wound barely stung anymore. "It is nothing. Just a small reminder to duck faster next time. I could easily stay in this comfortable bed for the rest of my life and be perfectly content," Jason thought, his heart swelling with deep affection as he watched the morning light catch the light dusting of freckles across her nose. He leaned down, pressing a highly tender, lingering kiss to her forehead. The physical bond between them felt incredibly solid, securely cementing their partnership. However, the quiet peace of the morning could not last forever. The pack still needed their leaders. Nadine sat up slowly, pulling the thick, dark blanket securely around her chest. She looked over the edge of the large bed. Discarded carelessly on the floor were her muddy tactical trousers. Securely clipped to the heavy fabric was her silver tactical stopwatch and her long hunting knife. Resting nearby were Jason's dark tactical trousers, which still contained his SUV keys securely inside the pocket. "We should get up," Nadine stated pragmatically, though she made entirely no immediate move to leave the warm bed. "Tomas will want a comprehensive debriefing regarding the road breach, and I need to organize the morning perimeter patrols." Jason sighed heavily, highly reluctant to let the outside world intrude on their private sanctuary.
"Tomas can manage the patrols for 1 hour.
"You are the beta. You are allowed to delegate tedious tasks." Nadine laughed quietly, a bright, deeply melodic sound that filled the spacious room. She slid gracefully out of the bed, picking up her discarded clothing from the plush carpet. She expertly stepped into her tactical trousers, highly securing the heavy belt. She tapped her fingernails lightly against the silver tactical stopwatch, immediately falling back into her highly organized, pragmatic mindset. "I am missing my gear," Nadine noted cleanly, looking around the room. "My heavy canvas gear bag is still sitting in the passenger seat of my unlocked truck near the southern grid. And I left my black two-way radio sitting entirely abandoned on a counter in the medical wing." Jason sat up carefully, ensuring he did not strain his left shoulder. He deeply admired her highly resilient, fiercely capable nature. "We will dispatch a scout to retrieve your truck and your canvas bag. I will personally walk with you to the clinic to secure your radio." "He supports my duties without trying to coddle me," Nadine noted internally, her respect for him growing even deeper. Jason walked over to his wooden dresser, pulling out a clean, dark gray t-shirt. He tossed it to Nadine, knowing her own gear was ruined. She caught it with a grateful smile, pulling the oversized fabric over her head before lacing up her heavy combat boots. She was fully ready to face the highly demanding day together as true equals. Chapter 27. Before Jason could pull the fresh dark gray shirt over his head, 3 highly sharp, highly aggressive knocks echoed loudly against the heavy oak door of his private quarters. The urgent sound violently shattered the quiet morning atmosphere. Nadine instantly squared her shoulders, her hand dropping defensively toward the heavy hunting knife securely clipped to her belt. Jason stood up quickly from the edge of the bed, his piercing gold eyes narrowing with intense, highly calculated focus. "Alpha Jason." The highly strict voice of head enforcer Tomas rumbled clearly through the solid wood. "The council elders are aggressively demanding your immediate presence in the main meeting room. They are highly displeased." Jason walked over to the door, pulling it open just enough to speak directly with his enforcer. Tomas stood in the hallway, looking entirely unfazed by the early hour. What exactly is the issue, Tomas? Jason asked quietly, keeping his tone entirely composed. The elders reviewed the preliminary combat reports from the southern breach, Tomas explained, his gravelly voice dropping to a highly professional murmur. The scouts detailed your highly calculated, strategic commands during the skirmish. The council explicitly realized that a feral alpha could not logically coordinate a flawless flank defense. They know your unstable mental state was highly exaggerated. They are going to try to forcefully bully me into submission. Jason calculated internally, a cold, deeply protective anger steadily building within his chest. But they have entirely no idea what they are walking into today. Tell the elders I will be there in exactly 10 minutes. Jason commanded smoothly, offering a firm nod. Thomas bowed his head respectfully and turned, striding efficiently down the long hallway. Jason pushed the heavy oak door shut and turned back to face Nadine. She stood near the center of the room, her sharp hazel eyes entirely focused on his face. They know, Nadine stated pragmatically, tapping her fingernails against her silver tactical stopwatch. They are going to aggressively push that $500,000 marriage contract. Jason walked over to his wooden dresser. He completely ignored his discarded tactical trousers lying on the floor, leaving his SUV keys sitting exactly where they were. Instead, he pulled out a pair of fresh, deeply black trousers and a crisp, dark button-down shirt. He highly carefully maneuvered his uninjured right arm into the sleeve, highly mindful of the white bandage resting on his left shoulder. They can push all they want, Jason replied, his voice a low, highly unyielding rumble. I am not signing a highly restrictive treaty, and I am certainly not mating with a stranger. Nadine watched him button the dark shirt. She stepped forward, gently brushing his hands away to efficiently fasten the top 3 buttons for him, highly aware of his restricted mobility. I am not hiding in the shadows anymore, Nadine declared silently, a highly fierce, deeply protective fire igniting directly in her heart. We face this council entirely together. I am coming with you, Nadine announced clearly, stepping back to look him directly in the eye. I am the beta of this pack. If the elders wish to actively discuss the strategic combat reports that exposed your highly clear mind, I am required to be present to verify the tactical data. Jason looked down at her, his gold eyes blazing with intense, deeply profound pride. He had spent months highly terrified that her fiercely independent nature would push him away. Now, she was actively choosing to stand right beside him against the highly stubborn leadership of their pack. I would highly prefer it if you did, Jason agreed smoothly, offering her a deeply genuine, highly confident smile. They left the Alpha's private quarters together, walking shoulder to shoulder down the quiet, sunlit corridors of the pack house. Nadine purposefully ignored the turnoff that led to the medical wing, deciding her abandoned black radio could wait. Right now, her Alpha needed her highly capable support. They approached the heavy double doors of the council room, fully prepared to actively dismantle whatever highly archaic arguments the elders had prepared. Chapter 28. Jason pushed the heavy double doors of the council room open, striding confidently into the highly illuminated space. Nadine walked exactly 1 step behind his right shoulder, her posture rigidly professional. The 4 senior elders sat highly stiffly around the large wooden table. Resting directly in the center of the polished wood was the thick, pristine stack of papers detailing the $500,000 arranged mating contract. The lead elder, an older man with highly severe features, stood up immediately. His face was deeply flushed with intense outrage. You deeply deceived this council, Jason, the lead elder shouted, pointing a highly critical finger directly at the Alpha. The combat reports highly prove you possess a brilliantly clear, entirely strategic mind. You are not suffering from a feral regression. You deliberately lied to dodge this highly lucrative treaty. Jason did not yell back. He calmly walked up to the edge of the large wooden table, projecting an aura of highly quiet, entirely lethal authority. He rested his uninjured right hand gently on the polished surface. I protected my pack from a deeply foolish, highly restrictive contract, Jason countered, his voice incredibly smooth but entirely unyielding. You wish to forcefully tie our territory to a neighboring alpha simply for financial gain. You prioritize paper treaties over the actual, highly capable warriors bleeding to secure our borders. These old fools heavily prioritize political wealth over genuine loyalty, Jason thought, his sharp jawline clenching tightly with intense frustration. I will not let them sell my future. The lead elder slammed his fist onto the table. That contract guarantees a highly secure alliance. It brings a high-ranking mate into this pack to heavily fortify our political standing. You have actively jeopardized our future by playing highly childish games. Nadine stepped forward, placing herself directly next to Jason. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest, her sharp hazel eyes entirely devoid of intimidation. A bought alliance is entirely worthless if the borders fall, Nadine stated pragmatically, her highly clear voice easily cutting through the elder's highly emotional shouting. The neighboring pack you deeply wish to merge with has highly weak perimeter defenses. If you securely bind us to them, we inherit their tactical vulnerabilities. The lead elder glared fiercely at her. This is a highly sensitive alpha matter, Beta Nadine. You are entirely out of line. She is entirely correct, Jason interrupted sharply, instantly shutting down the elder's highly disrespectful tone. He picked up the thick stack of contract papers with his right hand. My Beta organized a highly flawless, deeply strategic defense protocol. Her mandatory radio check-ins and highly precise troop deployments saved the southern grid last night. She actively fought 3 rogues simultaneously to heavily protect our scouts. Jason dropped the heavy stack of papers back onto the table with a loud, highly dismissive thud. He is actively defending my capabilities without making me look entirely weak, Nadine observed internally, a deeply warm wave of true appreciation washing over her. This is what a genuine, highly equal partnership looks like. You want a highly capable partner to secure this pack's future? Jason demanded, his piercing gold eyes locking onto each elder in turn. I already actively possess the strongest, highly intelligent partner in this entire territory. Beta Nadine earned her deeply respected rank through a decade of pure grit and highly fierce loyalty. I will not disrespect her highly extensive contributions by bringing a purchased stranger into this compound. The council room fell incredibly silent. The elders looked highly shocked by his deeply firm, entirely unapologetic declaration. I am officially rejecting the contract, Jason concluded, his tone leaving entirely no room for further debate. If you deeply wish to actively challenge my highly successful leadership, you may formally request a pack vote. Otherwise, this meeting is entirely over. Jason turned smoothly, highly confident in his total victory, and placed his right hand gently on the small of Nadine's back, highly respectfully guiding her out of the heavily tense room. Chapter 29. The morning air in the main compound courtyard was highly crisp and deeply refreshing. Jason and Nadine stepped out of the heavy front doors of the pack house, walking directly into the bright sunlight. The courtyard was heavily populated with pack members currently cleaning weapons and repairing highly damaged tactical gear from the previous night's intense skirmish. Head Enforcer Tomas stood near the center of the yard, actively conversing with Katrine and Andrew. Copeland and Vanessa were carefully helping Bryce, who was currently balancing on highly sturdy wooden crutches due to his severely twisted left knee. Jason stopped at the top of the wide wooden stairs, looking out over his highly resilient pack. He tapped his fingers lightly against the wooden railing, entirely ready to make his highly firm, private decision entirely public. She fiercely earned every single bit of respect from these warriors, Jason thought, his gold eyes actively scanning the loyal faces of his people. I am simply highly lucky enough to stand next to her. Listen up! Jason projected his highly authoritative voice clearly across the busy courtyard. The low hum of active conversation ceased instantly. Every single warrior, scout, and healer turned their highly respectful attention directly toward their alpha. Nadine stood perfectly straight beside him, her russet hair highly vibrant in the morning light. Her silver tactical stopwatch gleamed cleanly on her belt. Last night, our territory was heavily tested. Jason began, his tone incredibly proud and deeply sincere.
A highly coordinated rogue faction attempted to breach the southern grid.
They entirely failed. They failed because our enforcers arrived exactly on time. And our enforcers arrived precisely on time because of the highly strict, deeply intelligent protocols instituted by our beta. A low murmur of highly genuine agreement rippled smoothly through the assembled crowd. Katrine offered a highly enthusiastic, loud cheer, pumping her fist securely into the air. For 10 years, Nadine has fiercely dedicated her life to the safety of this pack, Jason continued, turning his head slightly to look directly into her sharp hazel eyes. He did not hide his profound affection. She leads with pragmatic wisdom and unmatched bravery. Nadine swallowed hard, moved by his public, respectful validation. For 10 years, she had felt alone, constantly fighting for basic recognition. Standing here now, she felt completely seen. I am not fighting a lonely war anymore. Nadine realized internally, a deeply bright, incredibly happy warmth blooming securely in her chest. I actually have an entire family standing right here. Jason reached out with his uninjured right hand, securely wrapping his long fingers around her hand. He highly intentionally intertwined their fingers, lifting their joined hands for the entire pack to clearly witness. I am formally claiming Nadine as my highly equal partner and my true mate, Jason declared, his incredibly clear voice ringing loudly across the gravel courtyard. She is the highly respected beta of this pack, and her highly authoritative word carries the exact same heavy weight as mine. We actively lead this territory entirely together. The courtyard erupted. Tomas let out a deeply loud, highly approving shout. Andrew and Mammon heavily clapped each other on the back. Even the highly strict healers, Copeland and Vanessa, offered deeply warm, highly supportive smiles. The pack did not care about highly expensive paper treaties or purchased alliances. They cared entirely about the deeply proven, highly loyal leaders standing proudly on the wooden stairs. Nadine looked out at the highly joyous, heavily cheering crowd, her heart beating rapidly with pure, deeply unadulterated happiness. She squeezed Jason's heavily calloused hand tightly, highly grateful for the deeply authentic, highly equal partnership they had successfully forged from the heavy ashes of their difficult past. "Thank you," Nadine whispered softly, leaning slightly against his uninjured right arm. Jason smiled brightly, his piercing gold eyes entirely free of the heavy burdens he had carried for so long. "You earned it all, Beta." Chapter 30. An hour later, the intense excitement in the courtyard had successfully settled back into highly productive daily routines. Jason and Nadine walked quietly back into the main pack house, heading directly toward the empty council room to finally discard the heavily rejected treaty papers. Once we discard these papers, we still need to execute our morning plan, Nadine noted pragmatically, her sharp hazel eyes scanning the quiet hallway. Tomas needs to retrieve my truck from the southern grid, and I need my radio from the clinic. Jason chuckled quietly, a warm, relaxed sound. "One crisis at a time, Beta. Let's officially put an end to this treaty first." "Highly efficient," Nadine agreed, offering him a bright, teasing smirk. They pushed open the heavy double doors of the council room. The 4 senior elders were still sitting rigidly around the large wooden table, heavily grumbling in highly hushed, deeply displeased tones about the entirely ruined $500,000 alliance. The thick stack of contract papers remained completely untouched in the center of the table. Before Jason could formally demand they throw the highly useless documents into the fire, a sudden, highly demanding yowl echoed loudly from the open doorway. Ripley, the deeply sassy tortoiseshell cat, sauntered confidently into the heavily tense room. The small red breakaway collar jingled highly cheerfully with every single graceful step she took. The feline entirely ignored Jason and Nadine, locking her bright yellow eyes directly onto the highly severe lead elder sitting at the far end of the table. That highly troublesome cat is a true menace, Jason thought, his sharp jawline twitching as he forcefully fought back a highly amused smile. But right now, she is entirely my favorite animal on the entire planet. Ripley strutted directly up to the lead elder's chair. She sat down heavily, stared directly into his highly shocked face, and opened her mouth. She dropped a very limp, entirely dead field mouse directly onto the toe of the elder's highly expensive, deeply polished leather shoe. The lead elder let out a highly undignified, deeply loud yelp, violently jerking his leg backward. His knee forcefully slammed into the underside of the heavy wooden table, rattling the brass fixtures loudly.
"Remove this deeply wretched beast instantly!"
The elder shouted, highly panicked by the small, deeply deceased rodent resting near his foot. Nadine clamped her hand over her mouth, her shoulders shaking as she tried unsuccessfully to contain her laughter. The sheer, chaotic absurdity of the situation entirely shattered the heavy political tension. This beautiful, ridiculous pack is exactly where I belong, Nadine admitted silently, tears of pure mirth shining in her hazel eyes. Ripley let out a smug, dismissive meow, turned her back on the flustered council, and trotted happily out of the room, her daily duties fulfilled. Jason reached over, grabbing the thick stack of contract papers from the table. He tossed them carelessly into the nearby metal trash bin with a satisfying, loud thud. "The meeting is permanently adjourned," Jason declared smoothly, his gold eyes shining with unapologetic humor. He wrapped his right arm securely around Nadine's waist, guiding her out of the council room. They walked down the sunlit hallway together, their joyous laughter echoing off the painted plaster walls, stepping securely into a bright, equal future. The end. Quick favor, don't go anywhere yet. If you thought Nadine was brave for scolding a supposedly feral alpha over a bottle of fabric softener, wait until you meet the heroine in this next story on your screen. You have to hear this disaster unfold. Click the video on your screen right now. It is completely unhinged.